As he walked down the stairs of the mansion, Gines von Ribant heard the maid say that Lady Iola had come to her senses. The girls were horrified by this, thinking that now the atmosphere in the house would deteriorate again. Furious that this bastard had woken up, Gines immediately went to her room. Abruptly opening the door of her bedroom, the hero began to shout at the girl in a rage. Smiling back, Iola was very happy to see her dear brother. As he continued to scream, Gines didn't understand how someone who didn't know when she would wake up could suddenly wake up. He was sure that she was fainting on purpose to get him into trouble. Iola von Ribant was the villain from the novel about the color of the holy girl. But in fact, she was a victim of this world, receiving everyone's anger at herself for the sake of the verisimilitude of the work. However, the main thing was that no matter what, she was truly a holy girl. At that moment, pointing his finger at her forehead, the hero thought that she should come up with some excuse. Although Gines was her brother, he looked more like a villain and went crazy from the inability to kill his sister. Instead of stopping her father, who bullied her, he also added fuel to the fire. In normal times, he didn't care about Iola, but as soon as he found out that she was awake, he immediately ran up. Apparently, in a past life, she kept silent, trying to hide the accident of falling from a horse. The heroine was surprised that they definitely rode horses together, but for some reason she was the only one who fell, which made Gines fall into a stupor. According to the story that the girl read, Iola should have been unconscious for much longer. Gines envied his sister, who rode better than him, and by whipping her horse, he pushed Iola off it. Staring at the girl in shock, the hero did not understand what she was saying. However, resentful that he was shifting the blame to his sister, Iola wanted her brother to apologize immediately. Grinning, Gines decided to clarify who she was talking to, even though there was no one else in the room. Deciding that she was completely crazy, the hero did not understand why he should apologize to such a bastard. After all, it was he who had to kill his sister's favorite horse, as it fell from it, so it is Iola who must apologize. Coming close to him, the heroine decided to find out if Gines knew why she fell off her horse. Not understanding what was happening, the hero saw such a manner of communication with his sister for the first time. She herself understood this because Iola in the original could not only not start a dialogue, the heroine could not even raise her head. Gines firmly decided that she fell because of her low origin and disgusting writing skills. Smiling calmly and starting to twist a strand of her hair with her finger, the girl decided to clarify whether this was the reason he would not apologize. Her brother didn't know what she believed or why she was acting so confidently, but even the crown prince didn't bother to pay her a visit while in a coma. Not understanding what these words were all about, Iola did not see any meaning in them. However, Gines was shocked that she couldn't even attract her fiancé, and considered her to be an empty space that only spoken could do. Pointing her finger at his chest, the heroine wondered if these were the words of a man who knocked his younger sister off a horse. She didn't know what he believed or why he was doing it, but there were still people at the racetrack that day who must have seen everything. Deeply confused, the hero began to shout furiously at his sister, considering all her words to be empty nonsense. Determined to see if he really thought so, Iola grabbed Gines by the collar, scaring him shivering. She decided that perhaps it would be worth visiting the Imperial Palace to check if these words were really nonsense. While the hero experienced an inexplicable and terrible fear of her, she wanted to know how low a person must be to behave like this. Believing that there was too much selfishness in him, Iola wanted her brother to watch his words in the future. And if he dared to say something like that in front of her again, he would very quickly regret it. Seeing his trembling face, the heroine realized that by using her saint power and speaking in a bold tone, she could make anyone tremble in fear. But this should not be surprising, because it was not even close to the fear that Iola felt. As a result, as soon as she let him go, Gines immediately ran out of her room, checking his heels. From such a sight, the girl was pierced by loud laughter, from which tears came to her eyes. Wondering how easy it was, she did not understand why she had suffered so much in vain. However, it was now decided that this would be the last time she would cry for Iola. The heroine decided that she would no longer tolerate insults in her direction, like a fake saint. And she also didn't care at all, even if this world turned her into a villain. The girl decided that she would definitely survive and live happily. Now Iola was not what she used to be, and she was determined to start a new life. To do this, the first thing she did was to go to the dining room, where the whole family was waiting for her at the table. Deciding to change this rotten mansion, she pretended to be glad to see everyone present. The father sat very tense, and immediately after greeting her, he sharply and furiously shouted the name of the heroine. He didn't understand how Iola dared to trick her family while her mother looked at her with contempt. Looking back, she realized that Iola's life had always been like this. For her family, the heroine was not a candidate for sainthood, but at best, a worthless piece of garbage. To the servants, she was an object of ridicule, which always occupied such a place. And now, Iola wondered if that was all her father wanted to tell her. Could he only threaten his own daughter, who had just come out of a deep coma? Considering her to be the man went berserk, deciding that she had no right to say whatever she wanted. When she also heard that Gina's had called her crazy, she looked at her brother in bewilderment, causing him to shiver with fear. Smiling at her father, the heroine decided that, to his regret, she was all right. Seeing that she answered her father so boldly and naturally, Gina's and the servants were confused. In shock that she dared to contradict him, the man slapped her in the face with a swing. Feeling the mark of the blow on her cheek, Iola was delighted with the evidence she had received and looked at her father carefully. Now what will happen if everyone finds out that she, a candidate for a saint, is being abused in her own family? If her father wanted, he could strike again, because with such a face, she didn't know if she would be able to attract the crown prince. Dismayed and horrified by her words, the father looked angrily at his daughter, deciding that she had really gone mad. In response, Iola thought that he could lure the crown prince himself, because he wanted it so ardently that he even raised his hand against his daughter. Everyone looked at her in horror, and the man trembled at the fact that he could not answer anything. Thinking that he did not hear, the heroine wished her father to take the place of the crown princess. Not understanding how she dared to say all this, the man immediately kicked her out of his sight. Once alone, Iola breathed a sigh of relief that she would not be bothered for a while. However, it was impossible to relax, because it was still necessary to settle everything with one person. Namely, she was now about to meet with the crown prince. Iola von Rybont and Akonda von Irnus were two saint candidates born on the same day, at the same time. At the age of 18, at the ceremony, it will be determined which of them will become the true, holy, and real will become the wife of the heir. The crown prince himself believed that Akonda would certainly be a saint, but there was one problem. He was already engaged to the daughter of the Marquis de Rybont, and had it not been for this, the heir would have been with Akonda long ago. While he was thinking about this, sitting in the carriage, a knight knocked on his door, wishing to announce the arrival of a guest. Upon learning that it was Mrs. Iola von Rybont, the prince was shocked by the unexpected visit of the girl. In this life, it was possible to use the power of a saint that was manifested on the eve of death. This meant that the heroine clearly remembered the content of the original work, which she could not remember before. The crown prince, named Ophid ben Gias Hill, in the original work was a character with an obsessive personality. To those who do not like to deviate from the given path, the meeting with Akonda seemed to be an unexpected accident. He was hopelessly fascinated by the time he spent with her, and she entrusted him with all the duties of a crown prince. It is impossible to convey how passionate Ophid's view of Akonda was in the original, and later, he will not want to see Iola at all. Therefore, in order to avoid problems, the heroine decided to immediately move the story forward for several months and break off the engagement. If the father found out about it, of course, he would lose his temper, but there was nothing he could do. In addition, Iola intended to survive, abandoning the role of a villain and becoming happy no matter what. You will also need to meet with the Grey Cardinal Vigros, and there will definitely come a time when you will need his power. In a past life, the girl sincerely begged Ophid not to break off the engagement. However, the heir reacted very indifferently to this, leaving the heroine, as if throwing away an unnecessary dog. Getting into his carriage, the first thing Iola did was apologize for her sudden arrival. If you think about it, the girl's obsession with Ophid was due to the fact that she was a candidate for sainthood and his official bride. But for the prince himself, she was only a nominal bride, and he himself was busy luring Akonda, whom he considered a saint. Deciding that such an unfaithful man is definitely not for her, the heroine also apologized in advance for her rudeness. Ophid was glad that she was aware of her ignorance, thus relieving the hero of the need to point him out. With a languid sigh, Iola decided that there was nothing she could do about it, and hoped that His Highness would not be angry. Although she was his fiancé, was the prince really so busy that they couldn't even see each other in private? The heroine allegedly happened to be waiting for you near the Ernest mansion, and she heard a rumor that the heir could be seen here, so she came. With a change in face, Ophid decided that while he had visited Akanda often, they were only friends. Wanting to quickly change the subject, he wondered what Iola had come to him with. Smiling sincerely at His Highness, the girl was glad to announce that they were breaking off the engagement. Taken aback by the suddenness of what he heard, the prince did not understand whose engagement she was talking about. It was about them, because if Ophid found out that Iola was a real saint, he would definitely not let her go. In the novel, His Highness was passionate enough to give his soul to Akanda. However, despite this, the heroine saw him as an extremely cold person. As much as he loved Akanda, if it was all for his own benefit, then he was the one who would not hesitate to make the worst choice. And it was necessary to break off the engagement before it became known. Looking at him, the girl thought that for sure the real Iola was very thirsty for his love. However, now, contrary to the original plot, she wanted to gain complete freedom of action. The heroine did not want to suffer from the pressure of the imperial palace in the future. Also, she was disgusted with forever obeying the will of the family, who shamelessly used the girl. Now she wanted to live for only one person, for herself. And for this, Crown Prince Ophid bin Giashil had to pass from her life. To her surprise, His Highness was in no hurry to agree to break off the engagement, looking thoughtfully at Iola. Unable to stand it, she decided to clarify directly whether the heir loved her. The heroine doubted this, as well as the fact that he considered her a real saint, so she thought that Lady Ernest would be more suitable for him. The prince was completely taken aback, not understanding why she had suddenly started such a sudden conversation. However, Iola did not consider it sudden, because every citizen of the empire knew that Ophid and Akanda were in a close relationship. At first, the heroine did not look at the holy lady with envy, and did not dare to think of His Highness as her fiancé. Therefore, these reasons were enough to break off the engagement, which the girl wanted very much. Shocked by what he heard, as well as her confident look, Ophid wondered if she had always been like this. Before that, it seemed to him that he knew her enough, but now, it was as if he met Iola for the first time. Thinking that it was quite funny, the prince smiled mysteriously. Looking carefully at the heroine, he did not understand why he should agree to break off the engagement. This question took Iola by surprise and baffled her, causing her to be completely lost. Then Ophid decided to clarify again why he should break off the engagement, if he did not even have such thoughts. However, the heroine knew that he had never even thought of her as a bride, to which the prince agreed, to her surprise. He really didn't care about her, as Ophid believed that she was not a saint, which further increased Iola's confusion. But as it turned out, the prince thought so before this conversation took place. Horrified by his words, the heroine was shocked by how impudent he turned out to be. The breakdown of the engagement, in her opinion, was an almost obvious outcome, because everyone around was already aware of the events. People whispered every now and then how the crown prince had abandoned his bride, exchanging her for Lady Ernest. Iola had endured all the shame and humiliation of telling Ophid about it, so how could he talk about it so easily? In addition, he also managed to maintain an honest and calm appearance. Biting her lip furiously, the girl thought that surely there must be a limit to his impudence. At this moment, the prince was calmly looking at her, as if studying her with his eyes. Touching her lips with his hand, he decided that if she continued to constantly condemn him, then she might bleed. This infuriated the heroine even more, because not only was he not going to break off the engagement, but he also grinned. At that moment, she looked at him in such a way that Ophid thought that the girl was cursing him. However, if she wanted to swear, she could not hesitate and tell him everything. Although it was over, His Highness was not going to allow this, which left Iola in a stupor. Ophid decided that in any case they would see each other more often. The heroine was outraged by this decision, looking at the prince in shock. The prince was grateful to her, because like an incorrectly fastened button falls from its place, so he almost made the wrong decision. Suddenly, he abruptly approached Iola, and she was horrified to think that he wanted to kiss her. But suddenly, he silently opened the door of the carriage, hinting that it was time for the girl to leave her. Relieved that it was not a kiss, the heroine suddenly heard that she and Akanda were just friends. Therefore, from that moment on, Ophid wanted to strengthen his relationship with Iola. This was necessary so that she would not become his puppy, judging by her eyes. Enraged by his words, the heroine did not have time to say anything, as the prince simply threw her out of the carriage, into the hands of a knight standing next to her. Stretching out his hand to her, he hoped that they would certainly see each other at the upcoming meeting, as bride and groom. The girl shouted again about breaking off the engagement, but Ophid abruptly closed the window and his carriage started moving. At the same moment, a maid approached her, who decided that it was time for the mistress to go to class. Furious, Iola thought that she was planning to abandon the indecisive protagonist, but everything got messed up from the first page. Perhaps it was just a sketch, but she was also a candidate for sainthood, and wasn't that a waste? Picking up the stone and furiously throwing it into the prince's carriage, the heroine thought he was crazy. At that moment, Ophid heard a loud knock on the body of the carriage and the voice of the maid, who was horrified by the actions of the mistress. Realizing that she had just directly condemned him, the heir had no idea that she had such a cute side. Clear eyes and a lively voice, but nevertheless a confident position, and says what she wants. In other words, she is very attractive. He remembered how, at one of the banquets, the aristocrats had mockingly spoken of Iola, believing that Akanda was more suitable for his highness. Now, it was a mystery to the prince why such a rumor had spread in the first place. Admitting that he was arrogant too, Ophid decided that it was worth talking to her earlier. He felt a little sorry for her, who had come to break off the engagement with him. However, even if he was convicted for it in the future, the prince did not want to let Iola go for the time being. Meanwhile, the gray Cardinal Vigros, leaning on the trunk of a tree, considered the heir to be an arrogant scoundrel. He did not understand how Ophid could have stooped so low as to leave his bride and now desire another woman. At the same time, the hero watched as Iola took out her indignation in a rage, trampling the ground with her feet. Vigros thought she was mad to dare to announce the end of her engagement to the prince, and right in his face. However, he also knew that in order to cope in this world, one had to be reckless. Late in the evening, the heroine returned home and her brother was waiting for her near the entrance, with a very dissatisfied expression on his face. Not only was Iola annoyed to death with Ophid, but Genus made her angry. Pushing him aside, the heroine demanded that her brother immediately give way to her. He was furious and thought she was a dummy, and wanted to know where she had wandered so late at night as a noble lady. Looking at the starry sky, the girl was surprised that it was really so late. In a previous life, Genus also did not allow his sister to walk until late at night. Instead, he wanted her to think about how she could attract the crown prince at this time. Not understanding how he could say such nonsense to his own sister, the heroine decided to clarify why he was bothered by this at all. In his opinion, since she was the bride of the crown prince, she needed to be careful in her actions so that their family would not be slandered. Looking menacingly at her brother, the girl also wanted to know, since when does he consider her a member of his family? Trembling with fear, Genus couldn't say anything, looking at his family in confusion. She was not even funny that it was enough to prove herself strong once, and now he reacts like this. In the original story, he treated her like a dog on a leash and pushed her around unhindered. Knowing all this, the girl felt very sorry for her former self, who could not do anything. Seeing his silence and confusion in his eyes, she decided to ask if he had any more questions. If he had nothing more to say, then Iola was going to continue her journey home. She was pleased to see Genus lose heart, and in spite of everything, he turned out to be hopeless. Entering the mansion, the heroine was greeted by all the servants, respectfully bowing their heads. They used to pretend that Iola didn't exist, but now they suddenly began to notice her? However, when the obedient child rebelled like this, the rumor instantly spread throughout the mansion. How easily and radically the atmosphere changed only after a small riot was even somehow dull. Throughout her life, the heroine stretched out a gentle hand to anyone, in return, without even receiving a warm look. And now, as she passed by, the two maids wondered why they needed to pay attention to the mistress. After all, it was better before? Indignantly turning to them, Iola wanted to clarify if the girls had forgotten who their mistress was. The maid shuddered at her gaze, and the heroine decided that it was time to do something. Instead of spraying his noble authority on them, wouldn't it have been better to make them work? The maids immediately fell to their knees in front of her, admitting their guilt and begging for forgiveness. However, in Iola's opinion, the apology was nonsense, because she only now remembered something. In the original story, when she called for help, the servants made a gloomy appearance, as if they did not see her. They seemed to deliberately praise Akanda in her presence and humiliate the villain. Once, one of the maids even ruined her dress by cutting it with scissors. Therefore now, the heroine was not going to stand on ceremony and passing by them. She suddenly saw her mother on the stairs. At this moment, she remembered that there had been a similar situation in the past. On that occasion, standing in the same place, Iola was falsely accused and begged her mother to believe her that it was not her. In the end, the girl made sure that there was not a single person in the mansion who would believe her. And although the heroine rebuffed only once, now the woman behaved much more cautiously. Iola craved love from her family all her life, but there was no doubt that she lived like a dog on a leash. Shocked by these arrogant and stupid people, the heroine greeted her mother. In addition, she also wanted to be provided with a faithful maid and a cab guard. The reason was that she was not comfortable traveling alone, and the woman thought that her daughter had finally come to her senses. She did not want to see herself wandering alone like a commoner, but fortunately everything was fine, and she wanted Iola to go to her room. Ironically looking at her mother, the heroine calmly decided that she just needed to sit quietly and not make a fuss, like last time. The woman looked at her very puzzled, not understanding what was happening. The servants who were watching also did not understand what had happened to the mistress, and when she stopped being afraid of her mother. Meanwhile, Iola thought that her brother, who had continued to humiliate her, was now hesitating at her every word, and her father had disappeared altogether. At the same time, her mother, who had been watching indifferently, now began to show interest in her. This was no different from a game in which changing one option changed everything. But the most absurd thing was that the main character of the novel was a man. Even in the past, Ophid had revolved around her, barely helping her and tearing Iola's heart apart. However, now, the heroine wanted to do something for which the prince would certainly be condemned, and she wondered if he was ready for this. Suddenly, she remembered that there was also a gray Cardinal Vigros in the novel. They met a couple of times when Iola was in her body, and he was the only person who was kind to her. But in the end, Vigros also chose Akanda, around whom the whole world revolved in this novel. Be that as it may, it was hard to believe that such a strong and free guy would ruin himself for the sake of Lady Ernest. Meanwhile, as she lay in her bed with her arm outstretched, Akanda decided that she would never tire of looking at her body. Suddenly, Jane's maid came in, hoping that her mistress was still awake. When the maid learned that the maid wanted to tell her something funny, the girl was happy and invited her to her place. As it turned out, Jane had heard some interesting rumor, which interested Akanda even more. This was the case with Madame Riband, who was rumored to have become not herself lately. Everyone must have gone mad, for even Akanda herself knew what kind of person she was. The maid believed that even if the rumor was true and everything changed, her mistress would still be able to follow the path of the saint. Running her hand through the maid's hair, Akanda remembered that she had already forbidden her to say such things. However, now she wondered what exactly had changed in Lady Riband. Hearing that Iola, known for her fierce nature, had suddenly become like a different person, the girl's face darkened greatly. Meanwhile, the commander appointed Knight Siren as Lady Riband's bodyguard, which horrified him. The hero did not understand why it was he and the commander who thought that he was really going to contradict the order now. Not at all intending to do this, the hero simply knew what kind of woman she was. Iola, being a born candidate for sainthood, was jealous of the successful candidate Akanda and did dirty deeds. And all because her fiancé, the crown prince, and Lady Ernest were close. Kieran also knew that she, consumed by jealousy, was trying to get a breakup, and how could such a person become a saint? The hero could not believe that he would guard such a stupid girl, and even alone. If he were offered to guard Akanda, he would gladly agree, considering it an honor for himself. In the evening, arriving at the Riband mansion, he went to her room and next to the door, he found the new personal maid of the mistress. A young, short, chubby girl, she was crying loudly, for she had also heard of Iola. Kieran tried to calm her down, knowing in his heart that he wanted to cry too. He had heard that the mistress had a vicious temper, and was not sure that such a fragile maid would cope with her. As it turned out, the maid agreed to this only because they paid a lot here, but she did not know that she would need to become a servant. Continuing to roar, she imagined how the mistress would beat her, which caused the hero to come to a stupor. He decided that she had nothing to fear, because even aristocrats could not purposefully harm their subordinates. This girl reminded him of his little brother, so Kieran could not leave her. Deep down, he made a decision that if she was bullied, he would not stand aside, even if it threatened dismissal. Knocking on Iola's door, he froze in confusion, not even realizing how terrible a person she was. The heroine opened the door, smiling sweetly and greeting the servants happily. The knight had expected a more sinister look from her, but the pretty image of the lady confused him. Realizing that Kieran was standing in front of her, Iola was very surprised. He was the third son of Baron Bandas, loyal to the Marquis of Riband, and also a knight belonging to the heroine's father. This time, she believed that the plot would be different from the novel and they would not meet. Putting his hand on his chest, the hero greeted the mistress, introducing himself as her personal bodyguard. In the original story, he was assigned as Lady Ernest's bodyguard. Kieran was so convincing that Akanda felt her anxious heart calm down. At the first meeting, he respectfully bowed the knee and kissed Lady Erna's hand, subsequently giving her love without reciprocity. Kieran was an ordinary hero, loyal to Akanda, and now Iola did not understand why he was the one who became her bodyguard. Seeing that the lady was thinking, the hero decided that she was not listening to him, and at that moment, the maid sharply shouted a greeting. Pressing her hands and tearfully looking at the heroine, the young girl introduced herself as Shiana. Not understanding what kind of cat in boots it was, Iola was shocked by the cuteness of her new servant. Being grateful to them for coming, she realized that it was already late and sent the servants to rest. When he left, the heroine collapsed on the bed, thinking that there was too much for one day. Falling asleep, she had a dream in which she was in the place of teaching the holy maidens, where the teacher was conducting a lesson for a student. He shouted furiously at her as she couldn't remember a single word from the book. Young Iola trembled in front of him in fear as the man became indignant that she hadn't even remembered the third time. The heroine was surprised that this is how she looked before, when she did not know that she was a true saint. The teacher was perplexed. How could he not understand the lesson at least once, because there was a limit to practice? The mistress was a problem of his pride, and although it could not be solved by mere memorization, was it not possible to remember it at least once? Apologizing, the drooping Iola hoped that the teacher would explain everything to her one more time. But the man clapped the textbook in front of her, deciding that it was pointless, because she could not even remember the simplest ones. From this, she began to shake in tears, making him even more furious. He believed that a girl should try even harder until she understands, because this is elementary student etiquette. Hearing that she would like to understand at least half of it, like Akanda, Iola shuddered doomedly. Seeing this, the teacher turned away and chuckled haughtily, deciding that she wasn't listening to him at all. The girl herself was very afraid and did not understand how long she would be scolded. Is it possible that because she can't keep up with Akanda, she will always be shouted at now? Looking contemptuously at the student, the man decided that he must have been ridiculous to her, since she had to be crucified like that. Iola began to desperately deny this, trying to convey that she was trying very hard. Until he understood why she couldn't follow her lessons every time, she thought he was talking too fast. Even though she was one of the candidates, Iola was sure that she wasn't a saint. Looking at her past self, the heroine wanted her to stop blaming herself for everything. Shocked by the thoughts that came to her, Iola just wanted to be happy. The heroine also wanted this, being and like Kim Ji-young in her past life. Looking at her helpless young self, Iola did not understand. Was she not worthy of happiness? Suddenly, little Saul appeared, who wanted the heroine not to dare to give up. Looking at her, Iola decided to escape the curse of the novel by turning it into her story. When she woke up at the same moment, she thought that both now and in the past, Saul was saving her again. The next day, sitting on the lawn and leaning on a tree trunk, the heroine decided that singing is a great stress reliever. Opening her mouth and starting to make sounds, Iola suddenly heard a magnificent song caressing her ears. Shocked at how beautifully she sang, the girl thought that this was also the power of a saint? Then she continued to sing without any excitement, delighting the local fauna. Sitting on the tree at that moment, Vigros had already heard that the ceremony of consecration of the saints had not yet taken place. However, he was now almost certain that it was Iola who was the saint. He also knew that she was the bride of Ophid and an outcast candidate for sainthood. Carefully jumping down from the other side of the tree, he wanted to leave silently, hoping to talk to her next time. But suddenly, he accidentally stepped on a branch that crunched loudly, causing him to flinch. Iola peeked out from behind a tree in surprise, noticing Vigros frozen in place in confusion. When she gained the power of a saint and turned back time, that was the only thing that disappointed her. The girl wanted to return to the time when she did not yet know the Grey Cardinal. She was very interested in how they first met, and now she finally understood it. Smiling, she thought that the daughter of the Marquis Ribon was here, but the hero did not understand what was wrong with it. The fact was that not everyone could come here, and if he did something carelessly, he could get it. Vigros wondered if she was going to scream to call people. To this, Iola only smiled mysteriously, which made the cardinal consider her cruel, because a poor, uninvited guest can have his head torn off. Talking to her, Vigros was amazed that he did not feel surprised, and was not even at a loss. Suddenly, the girl decided to give him a rose as an apology, which finally puzzled the hero. He knew for sure that they saw each other for the first time. The poet did not understand why she was apologizing. As it turned out, Iola thought that perhaps they had met in a past life, so she decided to give him a flower. Hearing also that she liked to talk to him, Vigros was very surprised. He did not understand whether she was not afraid, but the heroine, on the contrary, was very comfortable next to him. In the original story, she could not say a word properly, and it was even difficult for her to breathe. And of course, now the hero did not know that time, he was the one thanks to whom Yahello could breathe deeply. Hearing for the first time that someone was comfortable with him, Vigros thanked the girl for the flower. He also liked her singing very much, which made the heroine a little confused. Vigros von Illa was a man that even the emperor could not easily touch. And although he was the one who gave Yahello a break, the hero was portrayed in the novel a little differently. The inhabitants of the empire jokingly intimidated disobedient children that for bad behavior, they could be taken away by Illa. Many people were generally afraid to approach him and just be nearby. Even the most arrogant nobles behaved cautiously with him, not trying to be unceremonious. It was all about his strength, because during the war, he destroyed many monsters with one spell, forming a river of their blood. But Akanda von Irnus, when she met him, did not even flinch with fear. Since she didn't judge people by rumors alone, she wasn't afraid of him at all. He thought that the girl would run away only after learning his real name, but to his surprise, she had no intention of doing so. The reason was that Akanda was well aware that he had done nothing to her. Then Vigros realized why Ophid kept her by his side at all times. The girl, thinking that the hero was disrespecting the crown prince, but the fact was that he thought she was beautiful. At the same time, Vigros also considered himself to be an infinitely greedy person. For this reason, he decided that if Akanda did not run away now, he would definitely kiss her. If you think about it, whenever Vigros appeared, the read rating of the novel was questioned. The heroine wondered if she really remembers short phrases because of the power of the saint, or perhaps the unknown power of the novel deliberately shows it to her. In the original plot, the hero was a very charming and extremely dangerous person, but the man she met turned out to be very kind, giving the girl magical moments. Realizing this, Yahello thought that she had really begun to harbor something for him. And if she asked him to be on her side, would Vigros accept such an offer? The heroine did not understand why he had come here, but in the cardinal's opinion, he could not have come because she sang so beautifully. Giggling, Yahello was surprised that he had the audacity to come here without permission and to listen to the song for free. Vigros wondered what he should pay then, because he couldn't give the rose back as payment. If the heroine had a specific wish, then he was ready to fulfill it. At this moment, Yahello still couldn't believe that she was sitting and talking to the hero. When she returned again, she believed that one day she would definitely find him. However, she didn't think that Vigros would appear before her like this. Most of all, she wanted the hero to take her side, but Yahello did not dare to ask for it. In addition, the girl was stopped by the fact that perhaps it was too much payment for the song. The only thing she could really bargain for was the power of a saint. But perhaps the hero did not want the power of the saint, but Akanda herself, which greatly depressed Yahello. Suddenly, Vigros approached her, wanting to know the girl's name. He would be sad if their conversation ended before she introduced herself. In addition, she was the first to give him a flower, and his proposal surprised Yahello very much. After introducing herself, the heroine found it very funny that he came himself and asked for her name. After hearing that she also wanted to know his name, the hero decided to clarify that he was a rather scary person. He hoped that she wouldn't run away after learning about his real name. However, she had already made such a promise in a previous life. Therefore, even now it was not difficult for her to promise that she would not run away, after which Vigros revealed his name. Yahello was shocked, thinking that he would say it only after a few meetings, and she did not believe that he would answer so seriously. At this moment, he was looking at her with eyes reminiscent of a cold, deep sea, and she wondered what he was thinking. But the hero only wanted her to keep her promise and decide on her desire. Gathering all her will into a fist, Yahello decided to find out if the condition of the deal was the power of a saint. Would he take her side? Vigros paused for a moment, looking into the girl's eyes, but she herself knew that it must have sounded very unexpected. In a past life, sitting on the edge of her bed, the hero promised to give Yahello something. Namely, himself, and he wanted her to remember that she could ask him for help at any time, no matter what happened. In any situation, Vigros continued to be kind to her. However, now, because of her awkward judgment, can anything change? Yahello was about to receive a refusal, but suddenly, the cardinal took her hands, accepting the terms of the deal. Looking into her eyes, he decided that he would always be by her side from now on. The girl was very surprised that he accepted her offer so easily. Knowing that he was a negative hero, she did not understand whether she could get close to him. Besides, when he smiled, all worries seemed like a piece of tissue paper. The man who had been so cruel in the novel, but was now smiling so tenderly, turned out to be a truly unpredictable person. Vigros didn't understand why she was worried about him being like a handsome madman when he signed a contract. Then Iola wondered if he was really so sure that other people would find him handsome. In addition, everyone considered the heroine a fake saint and villain, but why did the hero want to help her? Based on these words, Vigros decided that perhaps that was why she thought he was suspicious. Although she was a candidate for a saint, there was no reason for him to appear like this, because everyone was sure that she would not become a saint. Smiling at her, the hero decided that there was no need to doubt, because first of all, he came here for her. Iola did not understand what the reason was, and as it turned out, he just liked her. Hearing about this from his lips, the heroine was very much puzzled. However, it wasn't without reason, and there was also a reason why he had come here. Touching her chin with his fingers, Vigros could smell the scent of a saint emanating from the girl. The hero was desperately looking for this very sweet and pleasant aroma, and the search led him here. Looking at him in bewilderment, Iola couldn't believe that such a thing even existed. It seemed that the crown prince did not know such things, but how did Vigros know about it? However, now it is the hero's turn to listen to the girl's brief story about herself. Not knowing what to say, the heroine thought that maybe it was worth pretending that it was all just a joke and leaving safely. Or, since he already calls her a saint, should he tell everything about himself? Perhaps it would be right to deny her holiness, because she did not even know whether Vigros could be trusted. Looking at him carefully, Iola confessed that she was a true saint, unlike Lady Ernest. However, the girl had no intention of really becoming a saint, which surprised the hero very much. He knew that the honor of becoming a saint was not something she could influence. However, knowing how the saints had lived so far, Iola decided not to do it, even if it was hard. In addition, she did not like the crown prince at all and wanted to live her life only under her own name. Not only Ofidu, but also the people of the empire who follow the saints abnormally, the heroine wanted to strike without any mercy. But Iola did not know how best to tell the hero about it, so she decided that later they would continue the conversation. Vigros was surprised, because if it was so important, why wouldn't she just tell? The reason turned out to be simple, and the thing was that she also liked him. Shocked by what he heard, the cardinal turned away embarrassedly, hardly believing his ears. After that, he decided that he simply could not stay away from such a grand plan. In addition, the saint's strength was a chance to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Grabbing Iola by the waist, Vigros decided that he would be a lover for her plan. Having pushed him away, the heroine was not ready for such closeness, which amused the hero. He believed that it was not so embarrassing to be sacrificial in a romantic relationship, because there was nothing strange in helping her properly. Blush with embarrassment, Iola did not see the need for this, while Vigros decided that it would be an opportunity for revenge. He had never liked this scoundrel, the crown prince, who even now left his bride, chasing another woman. The heroine knew that even if they pretended to be lovers, Ofidu would not care, but the hero doubted this. Remembering that the prince really changed his mind about breaking off the engagement, it turns out that this plan could really work. Smiling, Iola thought that then she would really be able to harm this bastard. The cardinal at this time, the more he looked at her, the more she seemed interesting to him. To begin with, the heroine wanted a secret relationship to prolong the pleasure, but Vigros believed that it was not worth giving the enemy extra time. However, according to Iola, anything suspicious tickles the nerves even more. The hero agreed with this because for sure, for His Highness, it would be the first time that he would not get what he wanted. Wanting the people who saw them to be jealous to the point of losing their pulse, Vigros was determined to become her lover. Realizing that she had met Vigros and it had come to contract love, Iola decided that everything had gone as it should. However, during the drafting of the contract, the hero was shocked that she had never been in a relationship. Since they had just started dating, even seeing each other once a day was not enough. Why then did the heroine offer to see each other once every 3 days? However, the girl simply did not want to distract him from work. But Vigros decided that he was always free for her, so he wanted to see her at least once, every day. As it turned out, he had read a romance novel a little and knew that an ordinary love contract would be enough. Prior to this, Iola did not even think that she would be able to seriously attract Vigros to her side, but after signing the contract, she finally realized it. Pointing the holy girl in the forehead with his finger, the hero decided that now it was time for him to leave. Wishing to see his road as soon as possible, he instantly disappeared into a black spot that appeared in the air. Meanwhile, one person was poring over documents at his desk when suddenly a black hole began to appear in front of him, in the air. Seeing the gentleman coming out of it, the man was shocked by his unexpected arrival. Experiencing the deepest indignation, the hero did not understand what if he overworked here and then suddenly fainted. However, Vigros did not understand why he was so angry while having a very high salary. Pointing to a giant stack of documents, the man decided that even doubling his salary would not be enough. But the cardinal decided that he had no conscience, as he left him a little work each time before teleporting. That's right, but the problem was that the gentleman started yesterday, but he continued like that. Having received the long-awaited signature from him, the man was happy, and the hero decided to ask him something. When Vigros wanted to know something, it always turned out to be a headache, so the subordinate looked at him in fear. Smiling, the hero admitted that from that day on, he entered into a relationship. The man considered it nonsense because what lady would fall in love with a master? However, after showing him the flower and telling him about the invitation, the hero brought his subordinate into a stupor. Looking suspiciously at the flower, he did not understand what kind of person could give it to Vigros. As it turned out, at first he was fascinated by the beautiful singing, and he followed it, after which he received a large rose as a gift. They also made a deal, and since the lady was one to keep her promises, the cardinal was determined to keep his own. Of course, he didn't tell his subordinate that this was just a fictitious contract, as it was a secret. However, the subordinate knew that the master had a habit of breaking promises and hoped that Vigros would not kill anyone. Smiling proudly and folding his arms over his chest, the hero decided that this is exactly how he is not going to kill anyone. The man was shocked, knowing that Vigros would not help anyone. However, this is exactly what the hero found funny. He couldn't remember exactly, but when he met this lady, Vigros had an incredibly familiar feeling. Then the man realized that he really liked someone, and since the gentleman had already taken a step, he could not be stopped now. Still, he didn't understand who this woman was who decided to give the flower to this monster. The next morning, Siana came to the mistress's room to wake her up. Before that, she had heard a lot from the other servants that Iola not only lacked recognition, she was also greedy and stupid. The maids warned her that if any of the heroine's belongings went missing, she would immediately accuse her maid of stealing. Siana remembered how, because her behavior was so different from her appearance, she had never been treated well. Deciding to be attentive and careful, she was very afraid that problems might arise here as well. Entering the mistress's chambers, she saw Iola sleeping sweetly in her bed. Looking at her carefully, Siana thought that the mistress was incredibly beautiful. The maid found it strange that her face did not show that she was an arrogant and inattentive noblewoman. Remembering how the heroine had greeted her affectionately the previous evening, Siana suddenly heard that she had woken up. Seeing the maid in front of her, Iola smiled at her, greeting her happily. Touched by this turn of events, Siana hoped that her mistress had slept well. Realizing that the maid was nervous about the rumors about her, the heroine thought she was surprised when she was suddenly called here. Deciding that she had never been treated so well, the girl admitted that she had come just to wake her up. In this case, Iola hoped that Siana would help her look good, to which she immediately agreed. Rushing from the place, the maid decided to bring water for washing herself first. Now she knew for sure that the mistress was kind and sweet, which meant that the rumors that she was a villain were a hoax. Having found out the truth, Siana decided to take the side of the heroine and prove to everyone that she is not at all what they say. Seeing how fast she ran away, Iola thought that she really looked that frightening. In her opinion, Gianna was proof that she was not the same as before. Since there was no such person around before, the heroine believed that perhaps this is why he feels such tenderness for her. For some time, the family was busy avoiding communication and meetings with Iola. However, today, for some unknown reason, they gathered at the same table, waiting for her arrival. Sitting down on a chair with a straight face, the heroine wondered why everyone decided to gather today. Furiously slamming his fists on the table, his father thought that this was not the time for careless speeches. As it turned out, the Marquis had already heard the chatter at yesterday's tea party, and Iola realized that he was so angry about the situation with the Crown Prince. However, apparently, the father forgot that when she turned 12, he forbade his daughter to attend a tea party. Although the heroine is a candidate for sainthood, but how can she know where she has not been, and if her father is going to scold her, then you can at least name the reason. Seeing the Marquis begin to get up from the table with a furious look, Iola wondered if he was going to hit her. After all, she had already warned that if her father dared to raise his hand against her again, she would not tolerate it. The Marquis considered this blatant impudence because she was his daughter, which meant that he could raise her as he wanted. Calmly chewing a steak, the heroine was not delighted with its taste, although in a past life she could not help but throw herself at the meat. Seeing that she wasn't even looking at him, the Marquis jumped up in anger, thinking that his daughter was ignoring him. Suddenly, Gina's tried to calm him down, deciding that his sister had always been like this. Therefore, he did not want his father to be so angry, and the Marquis decided that his son was too kind. But the girl thought that she had not finished yet, which made her brother taken aback. However, it turned out that he interrupted her, and this was very rude of him. Probably, Gina simply forgot how he disgraced the heroine in front of everyone on her 15th birthday. Because of him, she became an inferior daughter, who was laughed at even by the servants, who at that moment were ready to fall through the ground. Angry, her mother did not understand how Yahello dared to bring herself together so rudely in the presence of her father. Although at the same time, she did not seem to be bothered by the fact that Ophid invited Akanda. However, the heroine knew that this was not the first time. Therefore, she was no longer worried, but her mother still believed that it was Yahello who did not take good care of her husband, which is why he behaved this way. Looking at the woman sternly, the girl didn't understand how long something she didn't even remember would last. Sighing tiredly, she decided that people did not change, which made her mother completely furious. But suddenly, Yahello abruptly stood up from the table, thinking that she had an upset stomach. She wanted to go to a very important saint's lesson and hoped that her parents would stop being angry about what had happened at the tea party. In addition, this is a lesson that my father learned from being obedient in the imperial palace. When he also heard that they would be in trouble if she did not pass the lesson, her father was furious again. Smiling back, the heroine decided that she would also study obediently. This woman's jealousy was unimaginable, and there was no end to her petty behavior. Yahello went crazy with jealousy, and everyone around her condemned her for it. But it was something that a girl lost in jealousy would never hear, even if it was the prince she loved. Watching him walk away, embracing Akanda, the heroine, through tears, wished to kill her. The whisper, like a curse, reached Akanda's ears, who realized that Yahello still did not hate her. Her eyes were full of pity, and in fact, she wanted to make friends with the heroine. Akanda, who had everything, could not give anything to the heroine, who was so hungry for what she did not have. Ophid did not understand why his chosen one would feel sorry for this villain. Then he looked into the girl's gentle eyes, and Akanda felt her face flush. Then she remembered what had happened between her and Vigros the night before. With a sense of guilt that squeezed her heart, the girl stood on her tiptoes and kissed the prince on the cheek. What happened last night wasn't what she wanted, so Akanda decided that this was her first kiss. Closing her eyes, the girl felt Ophid approaching, staring passionately at her. Soon, a hot and passionate kiss enveloped Akanda's plump lips. Lying in her bed, the girl read this novel and did not understand how this world could be so perfect. She firmly believed that the life of Akanda, whom everyone loved, was her bright future. It had been a few years since her obsession with the novel, but thankfully, she adapted and calmly played the role of the kind, holy Akanda. After all, for her, it was a very tender and sweet world, in which she had already built a good relationship with the prince and was preparing to meet Vigros. Everything was going very smoothly, and one look or a gentle gesture was enough for her to get anyone into this world. Although she was ashamed, since in the novel Yahello was the bride of Ophid, as in the end, she turned out to be only a fake bride. Akanda was sure that the heroine would clearly love the prince and envy her. After all, she decided to make this world one in which Ophid would be gentle only to her. The next day, Yahello prepared for the trip and carefully chose the appropriate outfit. As Shiana looked at her with a smile, the other two maids didn't understand what she was digging into. Suddenly, the heroine decided to get rid of all the dresses, shocking the maids. The jewel-sparkling dresses were something that Kim Ji-young hadn't even touched in her previous life. But when she became Yahello, she wore them against her will, like a doll, to look like a worthy candidate for sainthood. One of the maids tried to reason with her, because the mistress especially needed to wear a purple dress today. But as it turned out, the heroine simply did not like clothes that cut off her breasts so much. Thinking that this was even the crown prince's preference, Yahello began to throw her dresses to the sides. Also, in her wardrobe there were clothes specially designed for personal meetings of the girl with His Majesty. But in reality, Ophid forgot about her and was constantly boating with Akanda, so it was useless. Suddenly she found a dress for the trip, and seeing it, Shiana was surprised by the choice of the mistress. It turned out to be quite modest and reserved, but the maid was still sure that her mistress would look good in it. Seeing how well they got along with Ayola, the other maids looked at the girl with envy and bewilderment. Now that the clothes were finished, it was necessary to set off as soon as possible to the mansion of the saint. After changing clothes, the heroine got into the carriage with Siana, after which they set off. The more Ayola looked at the maid, the more she reminded her of Saul, Kim Ji-en's friend. Remembering this girl who sacrificed herself for her, the heroine hoped that now she was happy. Noticing that the mistress was a little gloomy, Siana decided to clarify if she was okay. Ayola was surprised that she was not afraid of her, because at the first meeting, the maid was shaking so much that even the heroine herself was frightened. After convulsively bowing to her as an apology, the maid mistakenly thought she looked like a ghost just because of the rumors. However, she now knew that Lady Ribant was not someone who was angry for no reason, and she was not a villainess at all. Siana herself noticed that other members of the family went beyond the boundaries of what was allowed in relation to her. Therefore, being her personal servant, the girl decided to always be by her side, which strongly reminded Ayola of Saul. Sincerely smiling in response, the heroine thanked her maid from the bottom of her heart for her kind words. In the meantime, the carriage stopped, and as it turned out, they had already arrived at the place. As soon as they stepped outside, Kiran approached Ayola, wanting to accompany her mistress. Having given her consent, the heroine understood that the reason for his escort was not as obvious as it seemed. A knight with a brilliant future, he became just an escort to a lady to whom he probably disliked. In a past life, vowing to protect Akanda, he saved her from an attack by bandits, after which Ophid arrived. That time it looked like Ayola had staged the attack, which made him furious. Kiran may have gone mad with jealousy, having lost his noble dignity, but he could not believe that the heroine decided to kill Akanda. Not understanding how she dared to do this to a kind and gentle man, the knight suppressed his seething anger and put away his sword. At this moment, the crown prince was holding Akanda close to him, angrily looking around. Kiran decided that this woman, Ayola, had better disappear from this world as soon as possible. He wanted to put an end to this outrage on his own, so that Akanda could enjoy only beautiful things. Now, it annoyed the heroine who even thought about it saw this scene. If you think about it, similar things happened before I returned. That time, during a hunting competition, there was a misunderstanding, and she went to look for Akanda. In the end, she fell for the trick, and at that moment, it was painful again. In the end, the incident also turned out to be an invention of Akanda, but no one believed it. Back then, Ayola believed that the girl was on her side, but now everything was different. Noticing the strange expression on her face, Kiran decided to clarify if the mistress was all right. Turning to him, the heroine thought that perhaps, as in the novel, the knight would one day decide to kill her. Deciding not to let her guard down, she pretended to just think for a moment. Upon entering the saint's mansion, Ayola immediately went to the library to attend a lesson with the teacher. As she sat at her desk, flipping through her textbooks, she decided that she should have visited this place a long time ago. Even if she wanted to know more about the saint, the heroine had no one to go to and no one to ask. After all, since Akanda was in the center of the original plot, there was no such description of the saint anywhere. Moreover, it was almost obvious that the imperial palace was hiding something. The only thing Ayola was sure of was that all saints marry the emperor. Sometimes the saint who became the empress died first, and then it was so, the ruler took a new wife, and she bore him new children. However, the successor was always the one who was born directly from the saint. It was as if they were preventing the possessed saint's bloodline from leaving the imperial palace. If it was a simple novel setup, the role of Akanda and Ophid would have been useless. But the fact that this hereditary succession has survived to this day was somehow strange and unpleasant. However, since Ayola was a true saint, she must have known this better than anyone else. After all, the heroine did not want to be kept trapped by a saint or used in the imperial palace. Looking at the textbooks, she remembered that the teacher had spoken to her as if he was ignoring the girl. His fierce image was imprinted in Ayola's thoughts, so that even after her return, she often dreamed of him. After all, she had answered him today, not understanding why the teacher was comparing her to Akanda. After all, wouldn't it be more correct to give an education corresponding to the level of the student? But the teacher believed that since they were both vying for the title of saint, then Akanda should be the model for the heroine. However, Ayola had come here to take lessons from a saint, not to compete with anyone. Surprisingly, everything changed, and the teacher thought carefully about her words. He realized that people are really not all the same, so he had to teach the heroine in a way that was convenient for her. He was sorry for the mistake he had made, and he would have understood if the heroine had decided to change the teacher. However, if she did not do this, the teacher decided to behave carefully from now on, after which he left. The moment she heard this, Iola realized something very important. Perhaps she could really change her future the way she wanted. She didn't understand why she had to live such a painful life when she was ignored and compared to others. Suddenly, a man entered the library, whom the heroine did not expect to meet here. Approaching her, Ophid confessed that he had come here to fulfill the duty of a bridegroom. He noticed that the expression in her eyes was different from what he had seen in the carriage. The prince wanted to come here earlier, but it was not easy to enter the residence of the Marquis of Ribont, even for him. Ophid was always cold to her because if he saw her, it would damage his reputation. Therefore, he secretly used the crown prince's power to enter the saint's mansion unnoticed. According to the heroine, this building was a place that no one was supposed to enter. Iola was very surprised that he had come here to fulfill the duty of a bridegroom. At this moment, Kieran, who was standing around the corner, cleared his throat, asking the gentleman for forgiveness. The heroine thought that he came to break off the engagement, but this was not the case, which caused her bewilderment. Hearing that Iola knew of His Highness's desire for her to leave the bride's place, Ophid began to move his fingers nervously. He decided that if she really wanted to break off the engagement, then her family would be against it, which greatly amused the heroine. She did not know that he had such a talent for intimidation. However, the girl also did not sit idle and found out about the exceptions to the law. The prince was shocked, because before that he thought that what happened in the carriage was just childish behavior on her part. Suddenly he felt sorry, which left Iola confused. Ophid wanted to see how the heroine's face would change if he apologized for what happened in the past. Will she throw sharp phrases as she did in his carriage? Or was she going to accuse him of lying for treating her like this until now? Should she really just vent her anger and hatred on him? Lowering his gaze, he pretended to admit that his past behavior was inappropriate for a fiancé. Not remembering if he had ever apologized to someone like this in his life, the prince looked at the heroine carefully. However, what he saw dispelled all thoughts in his head, leaving only a gloomy feeling of horror. She looked at him calmly, not flinching an eyebrow at his apologies, cutting Ophid with her gaze like a knife. At the same time, her face was like a transparent bottle, as if Iola was thinking without any emotion. She wondered if His Highness had come here and thought she would become a saint. If not, then the heroine did not understand why he was doing all this now. Looking at her in fright, the prince did not understand whether the real Iola von Ribont was standing in front of him. After all, true rage shone in her eyes, as if he was the enemy of her whole life. Still, Ophid liked such an expression more than an empty one. If he had nothing more to say, the heroine decided to tell about his innermost thoughts herself. She decided to quote the prince's words, which he would say to her much later in the original plot. For starters, he wondered if Lady Ribont really thought she was going to be a saint. Is it not because she attends classes for the saint and never loses sight of the name of the candidate for sainthood that she hopes to receive this power? It seemed that the rumors Ophid had heard were not true, and he wondered if she was sure of her position. As everyone knew, things were not going so smoothly in the empire, which is why he wanted to consolidate his imperial power even more. But Iola was a hindrance, and no one said that she would become a saint. Ophid considered himself more confident and perfect than anyone, so he wanted a holy woman as his wife. He wanted the heroine to think hard about whether she could really become a saint. The prince doubted this and could not choose her as his wife. Therefore, he wanted to break off the engagement with her today, which she sincerely wished now. Shocked by what he heard, Ophid was completely sure that he had never told her that. But the heroine knew that in the future he would certainly tell her so, because he loved Lady Ernest. Indignant at her words, the prince decided to remind her that he and Akanda were just friends. However, when a man who has a fiancé keeps seeing another woman, wouldn't anyone think so? Realizing that the reason for her anger was that he was seeing someone else, Ophid suddenly began to smile. Horrified that he did not understand her, Iola felt a sense of Spanish shame. Surprised at his persistence, she thought that only if she grabbed his pants and lost heart, then he would agree to end the marriage. Apologizing to the lady, Ophid decided to invite her as soon as possible. Enraged, Iola hoped that he wanted to invite her to break off their engagement. Deciding that he would contact her when the schedule was set, the prince gently kissed the heroine's hand. Now that he knew everything, Ophid did not want to let her go first. Hearing also that he would never give up on her, Jane, who was eavesdropping on their conversation, was horrified. She immediately ran to her mistress, not understanding how this could even happen. Running into the lady's room, she saw Akanda peacefully drinking tea at the table. Falling to the floor in front of her, the maid gathered her strength to tell what had happened. When Lady Ernest heard her begin to chatter, the first thing she wanted was for her to calm down. When Akanda learned from her that Ophid had met with Ayola, she looked thoughtfully into her cup of tea. This didn't bother her much, but when Lady Ernest heard that he had decided to stick to his role as a fiancé, she was furious. Slamming her fist furiously on the table, she frightened Jane into goosebumps. Closing her eyes in fear and lowering her head, the maid saw her mistress so angry for the first time. Raising her head, Akanda realized that it was not the girl's fault. Realizing that it was all Ophid's fault, Lady Ernest wanted to ask Jane about one thing. Not knowing in advance what it would be, the maid was sure that she would certainly cope. She also began to blame the air for everything and was ready to do anything, even to poison Ayola. Returning home in the evening, the heroine was again met on the threshold by her enraged brother. He wanted to know what Ayola had done that the crown prince himself had sent her a letter. Ordering him to move away and not interfere, the girl sharply hit him on the leg with her heel. This stunned Siana and Karine, who accompanied her to her chambers. They silently began to climb the stairs after the mistress, hearing the painful moans of Gina's who rolled on the floor, holding on to his leg. All day, the knight watched the heroine very carefully. It was a real shock for him when she herself wished for a speedy break off the engagement. In addition, the crown prince was actually clinging to her, which was very different from the rumors. As she approached her room, she stopped suddenly, puzzled her servants. As she began to open the door, she turned to them, deciding that Siana was free for the day. As for Kieran, he should have stopped thinking about useless things and gone to rest as soon as possible. After a while, she saw Saul again, who did not understand why the heroine ate so little. Looking carefully into Kim Ji-young's eyes, she wanted to go and eat with her. Daily expenses were modest, but there was still no payment for training, and the girl was deceived at a part-time job. At the moment when she cried, as if there was no one in the world around, as if Saul had magically appeared. Kim was sure that she just felt sorry for her, because she continued to be influenced by others. However, despite everything, the girl not only felt sorry for her, but everything was much deeper. Kim was her precious friend, and she only did it out of love for her. When Ayola woke up and opened her eyes, she felt tears streaming down her face. The heroine was shocked that because of this vile crown prince, she even cried in her sleep. Suddenly, a bird outside the window also considered Ophid a scoundrel, which stunned the girl. However, the intonation with which the crow said this seemed familiar to Ayola, and suddenly she understood. She hurried to open the window wider so that the hero could enter the room. Once there, Vigros instantly transformed into a human, appearing in front of the heroine. Approaching and taking her by the face, he did not understand why she was crying. Remembering his promise to be by her side, he wanted to take what exactly upset Ayola. However, the girl was so stunned by his question that she couldn't say anything in response. Then he plopped down on the bed next to her, deciding to ask if she knew how creepy Duke Illa was on the mainland. Suddenly, the heroine remembered that she had seen a crow from the window of the library and realized that it was also a cardinal. The hero did not want her to be surprised by this, because he had many talents. It didn't matter if she was angry, he wanted Ayola to take something first. After that, he snapped his fingers, and at the same moment, a tablecloth appeared on the bed, on which there were various treats. The heroine was completely confused, but Vigros considered it a trifle. Looking at her intently, the cardinal considered Ayola too thin, as if she was starving herself on purpose. He decided that she needed to eat more in order to gain strength and take revenge on everyone who bullied her. Realizing that he was practically quoting Saul's words, the heroine also decided that it was impossible to starve. Carefully taking the cookie and putting it in her mouth, Ayola was amazed at the amazing taste of the food. Vigros was not enthusiastic about night snacks, but still, he considered it a better option than a hunger strike. And while she was eating, he decided to show the heroine the contract they had signed. These were magical documents that were absorbed into each other's bodies and stored in each other's hearts. And if one of the parties violates the contract until the ally terminates it, that party will feel a pain in the heart. The girl was impressed that he himself brought this terrible contract along with the food. Having decided that they would officially start dating from tomorrow, Ayola didn't know what she should do first. The hero decided that he could challenge by arranging passionate kisses right in the city square. However, seeing the shock in the lady's eyes, he hastened to clarify that it was a joke. Instead, it was possible to arrange a casual meeting to spread rumors secretly. Taking a lock of her hair, Vigros hoped that tomorrow the heroine would belong only to him. To be honest, he was sorry to see her with the crown prince, which was strange since they hadn't even met. Suddenly, Iola realized that the hero was too close to her, and he wondered if she was really unpleasant. However, even at the first meeting, it seemed to the heroine that a strange aroma was emanating from Vigros, similar to the smell of blood. Looking at him suspiciously, she did not understand what the hero had managed to do. But when you think about what kind of person he was, it's not hard to imagine that he was up to something. Not understanding why he needed it, the heroine suddenly heard the invitation to go on a date tomorrow again. The hero intended to arrange such a sweet meeting that the crown prince would definitely go crazy with jealousy. Shocked by how hard her heart was pounding, the girl agreed. The next day, Ophid was strolling in the imperial palace, accompanied by servants. Meanwhile, he thought a lot and did not understand why he hated Iola even before they met, and did not want to see her. Suddenly, he saw ahead of him Akanda, whom he had liked even before they met. The prince decided that she had come to the emperor, but as it turned out, the girl missed him. If you think about it, in the palace, to which the bride Iola could not come just like that, Akanda could come and go whenever she wanted. Ophid himself was shocked, because she was not even a saint, when suddenly, the girl wondered if he was going to detain her. Since it was already late, the prince decided that it would be better for her to stay in the room of the imperial palace. Agreeing with him, she wished that His Highness should accompany her there. The next morning, standing outside the Ribont mansion, Siana tried to prove to Kieran that their mistress was a very kind person. However, no matter how much he thought about it, the knight could not think that this was so, but the maid decided that he was simply unaware. Then, leaning over her, Kieran thought that Siana had already taken the bait of this witch's deceitful charm, which greatly outraged the heroine. Iola was not a witch at all, and in general, how can you speak in such a way about your mistress? Sighing, the knight wanted the maid to stop teaching him about life, considering Iola a villain. Shocked by such words, tears flowed from Siana's eyes, and she began to beat the knight on the armor, trying to get through to him. Hearing that she continued to cover for the mistress, Kieran thought it was completely absurd. After all, who first roared like a victim who was dragged here by a villain? On the other hand, the knight himself understood that this mansion was strange, but he tried not to think about it. Who knows, there may be hidden circumstances everywhere, so Kieran did not rush to conclusions. However, Siana knew that he was always outside, and she thought it was strange that their mistress Iola had been mistreated by everyone. When she heard from him that even dogs laugh at the heroine, she did not understand why he hated his mistress so much. But according to Kieran, many people in the Empire hated Iola von Ribont. Looking at him carefully, Siana decided that it was because they had not met the lady in person. The knight had nothing to say to this, and he looked at the girl in confusion. She wanted to know if he disliked the mistress after meeting her in person, but Kieran didn't think it mattered. Confused by his words, Siana did not understand what was important in this case, in the hero's opinion. Thinking about it, he decided that the Marquis of Ribont was really not an affectionate father. But it's not that Iola is brought up with coldness, and not with love and care, is it? On top of that, she was a famous woman who, with her behavior, brought shame on herself throughout the empire. On the other hand, the hero personally saw that the attitude of the crown prince towards her was radically different from the rumors. Covering his face with his hand, Kieran considered himself a disgusting guard, if he thought so of his mistress. He only dreamed of the day when he would brandish his sword for the sake of Lady Akanda. Suddenly, the heroes heard a loud bang from the blow coming from the mansion. Running there, the knight had a thought that everything was really as Gianna said, and what if she was right? Going inside, they saw the mother of the family and the maid standing in front of them, holding her face. Approaching the other two servants, they wanted to know what was going on, but as it turned out, the woman was just setting an example. Not understanding what example she was talking about, Gianna decided to clarify this question. To their horror, it turned out that this was an example of how she was going to raise her naughty daughter. Looking carefully at the maids, the knight was surprised that she was being beaten, but she was still acting like this. He was once again convinced that not only the Marquise, but everyone in this mansion was strange. Suddenly, Iola began to walk down the stairs, not understanding what her mother was doing here. Hearing her voice, the woman turned, looking furiously at her daughter as if she were an annoying insect. At the same moment, she struck the maid again, and the other servants blamed Iola for being subjected to such humiliation. The heroine had already asked a question, but without receiving an answer, she decided that her mother did not want to talk and she could leave. Watching what was happening, Kieran realized that perhaps it was all for educational purposes. However, seeing the woman's gaze, he did not understand how a mother could look at a child like that. The Marquise wanted to know if Iola had really refused the dress she had prepared for her. It turned out to be true, because it was not at all to her taste. The woman became even more furious, not understanding how she even dared to do this. In response, Iola thought that since she was not a doll, but her daughter, she could afford to choose the dress she wanted. At the same moment, the woman went berserk and slapped her with all her strength. Feeling the wound from the blow, the heroine did not understand what kind of scapegoat she was. Smiling at her mother, she thought that she would be in big trouble if she hit her like that again. The mother was horrified by her words, realizing that her daughter was again threatening to sue and deciding that she was completely crazy. Smiling at the fact that the spouses are so similar to each other, the heroine also considered it sad. Now even Kieran understood that this was not education, but violence. However, he continued to convince himself that there was clearly something wrong with this woman. Suddenly, Sienna could not stand it anymore and decided to stand up for her mistress, not understanding how the Empress could behave like this. The servants immediately began to contradict her, believing that only Iola was to blame for everything, but some were already beginning to doubt this. But suddenly the loud voice of the heroine was heard, who wanted them to be quiet. Moreover, they even tore one of her dresses to pieces, instead of selling it and helping those in need. The mother reluctantly did not understand, since when her daughter had become such a kind saint, and thought that it was worth hitting her again. However, the heroine decided that the mother should stop now if she and her father did not want to appear in court. Touching her earring, Iola didn't know what they were, but she certainly had nothing to fear. Throwing her hand away, the woman again couldn't understand how the girl dared to be so impudent to her. In addition, looking at the beaten maid, the heroine wanted her mother to stop taking out her anger on those who are dear to her. After all, they have done nothing wrong and do not deserve such an attitude towards themselves. You couldn't give yourself the right to be careless just because you get paid. Blushing with shame and rage, the woman could not answer, and disgraced, she walked away. Looking at each other in surprise, the other maids didn't understand when their mistress had become so cool. Later, the heroine drank tea at the table, in the company of Gina's and in the presence of servants. Looking at his displeased face, she thought that this mansion would not leave her alone. At some point, she could not stand it and decided that if he had something to say, then let him talk, and not spoil her mood. Gina's only wanted to know why she treated her parents like this. After all, they were all part of the same family. The heroine was not in the mood for a pleasant conversation now, so she did not want her brother to start a quarrel. Gina's was sure that no matter if she became a saint or not, she would still live according to her father's will. Hearing this, Iola wondered who had decided that, because her brother couldn't have counted it himself. However, in his opinion, this was the law of the aristocracy and nothing would work if his sister went mad alone. But the heroine was not mad, but was going to leave here, so her brother had to watch his words. Gina's wanted to answer, but at that moment a maid came up to Iola and, apologizing for bothering her, handed her a letter. Seeing the imperial emblem on it, his brother was confused. Iola was surprised at how everything coincided, and it seemed that they really tried. Seeing Gina's face, the heroine ordered him not to even think about calling his parents here. He was shocked, because they had been waiting for this for so long, but the girl herself knew it very well. Then her brother demanded to explain what kind of relationship they had with the crown prince, but she decided not to explain anything. His Highness had never sent her a letter before, and this time it was even suitable for an invitation. Smiling, Iola decided that the prince must have been in a different mood before. However, it was not a family affair, and having decided to take care of it on her own, the heroine did not want her brother to worry. He began to shout furiously, not understanding how much longer she planned to behave like this, because even indulgence has a limit. Frozen for a second, the girl grinned ominously, after which, with a smile, she looked attentively at Gina's. Suddenly, she jumped abruptly over the table and found herself in front of it, which greatly frightened Kieran and Sienna. Grabbing her brother by the collar, she decided that, although no one knew, he did not dare to say such things to her. And even if Iola remained silent, she would also not forget what happened at the racetrack. Hearing this, Gina shivered in fear and looked at his sister in horror. After that, she abruptly threw him aside and several servants ran over to help the hero get up. Meanwhile, Iola hoped that her brother would finally realize that he had become a stranger to her. Therefore, he should not be lenient, because she will not be like that either, and it is better for him to remember what may happen in the future. A little later, at the invitation of His Highness, the heroine arrived at the imperial palace. Of course, the heir sometimes invites people here, but he offered to meet where, in a previous life, broke off the engagement with Iola. At that moment, the only thing the girl wanted was to die. When she first came here, she had hope that something would change. The heroine was so full of fear and expectation that the despair of complete destruction turned out to be too great. Apparently, Ophid was the cursed male protagonist of this story. As she walked on, she thought that she had never looked so closely here. Since it was an imperial palace, there were books of extraordinary rarity in the reception room. It didn't matter now, because she didn't understand the prince's actions anyway. Who had called her just to chat? Maybe tomorrow rumors will already spread in high society, and parents will also find out. Besides, this was definitely not the time for her saintly power to be unleashed. Recently, thanks to the information found in the book, the heroine tested her strength. And if Ophid finds out that she has the power of a saint, he will never break off his engagement to her. Upon meeting him, she greeted the little son of the empire, and the prince decided that there was no need for formalities. He was just hoping that Iola had been calm the night before, and as it turned out, everything was the same. However, for His Highness, who hoped for her peace, these words were not enough. If the heroine did not know everything, she would think that there is tenderness in his words, but such things will no longer affect her. She believed that, as in the original, the prince would live with Akanda, and Iola would live her happy life. The girl wondered why the prince had invited her, and as it turned out, remembering his promise, he wanted to spend more time with her. However, in her opinion, if he does this, then problems may arise. In this situation, everyone considered Akanda a saint, and Ophid would have problems if his actions did not correspond to the interests of others, especially if he sees such an undesirable woman as Iola. At these words, His Highness was confused and dismayed, deciding to apologize for causing trouble to the girl. He was a little confused and had a terrible and painful feeling when something he knew well was ruthlessly shaken. Looking at the shaking prince, the heroine did not understand where his arrogance had suddenly gone. Why did he now look like a child who could burst into tears at any moment? It was like herself when Ophid broke off his engagement to her in the past. In front of him, Iola suffered as if the world had collapsed as he calmly and coldly rejected her. But after the break in the engagement, although he was indifferent, he helped the heroine several times. She decided to clarify that she did not hate him and perhaps they could become friends. But their engagement will be broken off in any case, and His Highness will marry Lady Ernest. And if the prince is not going to take responsibility, then you should not be friendly. Hearing about the responsibility, Ophid thoughtfully rested his head on his hand and looked away. Iola believed that it was better to let the groom lose his temper than to be tough, but it was not enough to pretend to be kind little by little. Ophid was perplexed, because could his actions really hurt the girl? Deep down, he thought that the heroine still loved him, but now he began to doubt it himself. Before, looking into her eyes, he saw himself, but now his reflection disappeared from them. Deciding to say something to her, the prince suddenly heard the announcement of the arrival of a guest. Falling into a stupor, he looked at the door in bewilderment, not understanding who it could be. Unlike him, Iola was glad that the moment had finally come when the story of the novel began anew. Only one person could commit such a bold act of disrespect without even warning about his visit through the servants. She was also the only lady in the world who was forgiven for everything she did. Entering the reception room, Akanda von Irnas immediately pounced on the prince with an embrace, joyfully greeting him. As it turned out, the location and structure of Akanda and Iola's first meeting were the same as before they returned. In the past, Lady Irnas appeared here at the moment of the breakdown of the engagement, bringing Iola suffering. Suddenly, the heroine was distracted from her tea, noticing something strange and carefully looking at this couple. While the joyful Akanda insolently clung to His Highness, Ophid looked very puzzled. Not understanding why he had such a reaction, Iola continued to stare at the prince. Suddenly, it dawned on her face that His Highness was not pleased with Lady Ernest, which shocked the heroine. Although Akanda often visited the imperial palace, she officially informed His Highness before she arrived. The prince knew for sure that this time there was no notice, and the girl herself was already here in the morning, but for some reason she came again. Seeing his confusion, Akanda was very surprised, waving her hand in front of his face. Pretending to be surprised by her arrival, Ophid remembered with horror that Lady Rebant was still there. At this moment, Iola sat in place and calmly watched them. Looking at her, a feeling of complete disappointment suddenly swept over the prince. He wondered if Lady Ernest hoped that the heroine would be jealous, even though she hadn't even been invited. Thinking that the rumors of Iola's poisonous jealousy looked amusing in comparison, Ophid decided to get rid of Akanda as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Lady Ernest decided to greet the heroine, and the prince was surprised at how familiar she was when interacting with her. However, he suddenly realized that he had never noticed this, and it was not clear to Ophid what was the reason for this. At this time, introducing herself, Akanda clarified that she was the one who went with Iola to the saints' courses. Smiling, the heroine remembered that in the original, the first dialogue was the same and in the same situation. If Lady Ernest had been an ordinary character, it would have been different, but she gave me goosebumps as she too had a novel. Akanda was well aware of the development of the story, but despite this, all the actions of the novel have gone as they should so far. Looking at Akanda with a smile, Iola greeted the lady respectfully. Knowing that everything should be different in the original plot, the girl fell into a stupor. Smiling even wider, the heroine thought that her reaction really did not correspond to Akanda's expectations. For her, Iola was just a doll to play with, because this decoration would perfectly decorate her life. That is why Lady Ernest did not let the heroine get rid of the role of the villain, pushing her to be true to her role. For Lady Ernest, Iola's life was a mere entertainment, like a play in a theater. Despite the fact that the heroine looked calm, Akanda decided, according to the original plot, that she was angry. The lady pretended that she hadn't expected the guests to appear because it was too early. At this moment, Iola even felt sorry for the girl who didn't know that she didn't plan to dance to her tune. Ignoring the lady, the heroine turned to His Highness, confusing her. Looking surprised and confused, Iola wondered if the prince and Lady Ernest had invited her. Coughing, Ophid considered this a misunderstanding, because he and Akanda were friends, and there were no restrictions on entering the palace. Seeing how zealously he protected the lady, Iola thought that it was because she was the main character. Although he has always been like this, and even in the past, at the debut of Girls in Society, Ophid fell for the trick of Lady Ernest. At a reception in their honor, he and Akanda were in identical dresses, for which a lot of condemnation was poured out on the heroine. In fact, Lady Ernest notified Iola of her intention to wear an orange dress, but in the end, she deceived her into putting her in a bad light. And while all the people shamed the heroine, who stood in confusion, the prince simply passed by and went to console Lady Ernest. And now, Iola didn't want Akanda to apologize, because her visit was because her relationship with His Highness was special. However, it was a good option, and the heroine just had an appointment right after this one. After saying goodbye, she wished the two of them a pleasant time alone. After that, Iola got up from the table, bowed out, and safely went to the exit. Akanda remained standing in a stupor, and Ophid tried to stop Lady Rebant by calling her back. But the heroine slammed the door behind her, after which there was a short pause in the waiting room. The prince was about to reprimand Lady Ernest, considering her behavior not quite right. But before he could utter a word, he suddenly froze in surprise, hearing that in Akanda's opinion, all this was strange. The girl stood, with a puzzled expression on her face, absolutely not understanding what was going on here. Ophid had never seen such a gloomy face on a lady when she suddenly decided that it should not be like this. After that, she silently walked towards the exit, leaving the prince in complete disbelief. Meanwhile, finally on the street, Iola was very happy to leave this place. However, when she first entered the imperial palace, she did not understand how she could get out of here. No matter which way she went, she still returned to the same place, which began to annoy. If she had known about this beforehand, she would have invited Sienna and Kieran, who remained in the carriage, with her on His Majesty's orders. In shock that someone managed to build such an intricate palace, all roads seemed the same to the heroine. In addition, there was no one to ask either, since there was not a soul around. Iola was already beginning to think that perhaps there would be a touching meeting with Vigros now, just as before her return. Crouching down by a tree and bowing her head doomedly, she did not know what to do now, because they had agreed to meet with the cardinal. Suddenly, the hero appeared right there, bringing with him a light breath of wind, and greeted his dear. As it turned out, the hero heard that the heir had called her here, and did not understand why she was alone now. Taken aback by his sudden appearance, Iola admitted that the escorts were waiting for her outside and were forbidden to enter the living room. Realizing that she had simply been cheated, Vigros was furious, once again considering Ophid a scoundrel. For some reason, at this moment, the heroine remembered one moment from the novel, which greatly surprised her. Akanda was embarrassed, but the cardinal, who was in love with her, did not see this, trying to woo her at every opportunity. Over and over again, confessing his feelings to her, the hero hoped for reciprocity, but in return he received only cruelty. In her gentle smile there was a sincere disgust for Vigros, who constantly clung to her. As soon as he approached her, she immediately began to get angry, although she was kind and sweet to others. In addition, when the hero saw her smile turn to the hapless prince, his eyes turned red with jealousy. From time to time, Vigros wondered if Akanda would be him if he killed everyone in the empire. Every day he hesitated with indecision, sincerely wishing to lock the girl away from everyone. The hero wanted to keep this divine light only for himself, but if he did, she would go crazy. Unable to come to terms with his dark and annoying obsession, he had to calm his bestial heart again. On her birthday, when she became flawless, and it was only necessary to give her happiness, the cardinal put all his strength and breath into it. Iola did not understand why she came up with this scene with a hero who was ready to do anything for Akanda. Not knowing if Vigros really loved Lady Ernest, the heroine sat with a thoughtful face that puzzled the cardinal. Iola wondered if she encountered this scene not in a novel, but in reality, would the mood really be spoiled? Perhaps it would be because of the feeling that her supporter was being taken away. Deciding to finally put an end to her thoughts, Vigros took the girl by the waist, because now it was time to start the date. First of all, they went to her carriage, and Iola hoped that her servants would agree to go home on their own. Siana didn't mind, but Kieran stared silently, not wanting to go anywhere without his mistress. In shock that he did not understand anything, the heroine was already embarrassed to use the power of a saint. Coming up and repeating her request in his ear, she used the force to influence him. However, the knight was only covered with sweat, but his appearance remained unperturbed. Not understanding anything, Iola remembered that he had listened to Ophid and thought Kieran was incredibly stubborn. However, she did not give up and continued to repeat that he needed to go home. Unable to stand it and admitting that she had a date, the heroine unexpectedly received consent. Still unperturbed, the hero turned around and headed for the carriage, which made the girl very happy. Breathing a sigh of relief, she suddenly noticed Vigros's strange look on her. He was curious to see exactly how Iola used her power as a saint. Moreover, he considered it very sexy, which made the heroine completely taken aback. He especially liked the way the girl whispered her request in the knight's ear. This greatly embarrassed the heroine, and she turned away from him, which amused the hero. However, now that no one is in the way, it's time to go on a date. After that, he took her hand and the heroes moved to another place in the blink of an eye. Iola decided to clarify if he was a wizard, but Vigros wanted to know her opinion about who he was. However, the cardinal already knew that the heroine was a saint, so refusing to admit herself was unfair on his part. But come to think of it, no great wizard could use his abilities in such a variety of ways as Vigros did. Thinking about it, Iola decided that his strength was like a miracle, after which the hero's face changed, as if he was frightened. Suddenly, the heroine remembered that the only miracle was the strength of the saints, after which she looked at him in surprise. Deciding to quickly change the subject, Vigros felt it was wrong to be distracted during the date and hurried her to the restaurant. Having seated the girl at the table, the hero wanted her to wait here until he brought something delicious. His behavior seemed strange to Iola, as if Vigros had deliberately avoided conversation. But she decided not to bother too much, and at this time, the hero did not have a face from the shock he had experienced. In the meantime, by order of the emperor, his eldest son, Ophides, came to him for an audience. Looking at his son sternly, the monarch wondered why he had invited Lady Ribant to the palace. Timidly looking away, the prince decided that she was his fiancé, but the emperor did not need this meager answer. Ophid knew that Akanda had always been an undeniable priority for his father. Probably he believes that it is she who should become the future empress, instead of the imperfect Iola. The prince himself also initially became close to Lady Ernest without hesitation, despite the fact that he already had a fiancé. However, now Ophid did not understand whether the crown prince's companion had to be a saint. These thoughts began to come to him after that meeting with Iola in the carriage, which turned everything upside down. But His Majesty the Emperor considered all this to be nothing more than nonsense. The prince knew that his father's goal was to strengthen imperial power, and it was about an unshakable empire. To do this, it was necessary to keep the saint in the imperial bloodline, so numerous sacrifices were inevitable. However, in addition to this, Ophida, as well as the emperor, knew that Iola was also a candidate for sainthood. After thinking about it, the monarch decided that his son should certainly marry the saint, and ruthlessly exclude everyone else from his life. But since, knowing everything, he says such things, the emperor decided to take a look at her himself. Meanwhile, carefully approaching the girl from behind, Vigros covered her eyes with his hands. Iola thought it was old-fashioned, but the hero just wanted her to feel how soft his fingers were. Most of all, the heroine was surprised that the cardinal was with her, and not with Akanda. She did not understand at what point the content of the book managed to be so badly distorted. If this is not the case, then perhaps the story of Lady Ernest and the cardinal has not yet begun. Suddenly, the hero opened her eyes and the girl froze in amazement at what she saw. Right in front of her, on a beautiful napkin, stood a large bowl decorated with carvings and filled with giant ice cream balls. The people sitting around began to look at them, while Vigros hoped that it looked delicious enough. Fascinated by his beauty, the ladies and ladies around could not understand what kind of family this gentleman was from. At the same time, Iola realized that if Vigros and Akanda met properly, as in the novel, he would become a prisoner of her love. Thinking that then he would hate her, the heroine suddenly heard the voice of the cardinal, who wondered what she was thinking. Looking carefully at the girl, the hero wanted her not to keep it to herself, and asked him what she wanted. Iola decided that he was a fortune teller, but Vigros was ready to become anything for his mistress. Then she wanted to know if he was destined to love someone, and that person turned out to be her enemy, what would happen then? However, the cardinal was shocked by what he heard, considering it a gaze and not fate. First of all, he was ready to tear apart a man who was her enemy with his bare hands. However, even if we assume that this happens, the heroine had absolutely nothing to fear. After all, they both had a contract in their hearts, so if it was broken, it would end in the death of the culprit. According to Vigros, only a lunatic person would be able to ignore this and behave as they pleased. But he considered himself completely adequate, after which he scooped up ice cream with a spoon and brought it to Iola's lips. Seeing in his eyes the desire to feed her, the heroine obediently ate ice cream. But suddenly the hero saw that a small piece remained on her cheek, near her lips. Deciding that she was asking for it, Vigros carefully removed it with his finger. At the same time, the girl sat without moving, experiencing the deepest embarrassment. After that, he wiped the ice cream from his finger with his tongue, which shocked everyone around him. At this moment, the heroine remembered that the last time she was in a relationship was when she was still Kim Ji-young. And although she had boyfriends then, she never built a deep connection with them. Because of this, suitors often took offense, considering her indifferent or concluding that she did not love them. At that time, the girl's life was very busy, so every day was very difficult. And as sad as it was, her poverty forced people to flee. Then she realized that only in films, a man was always there, even despite the difficulties. Suddenly, Vigros thought he was fascinated, even though he was handsome himself. He hoped that in the eyes of the heroine, he looked much sweeter than this ice cream. In response, Iola couldn't help but laugh, confusing him. She decided that he looked like a malicious cat, with a villainous motive. Languidly closing her eyes, she pretended to laugh because Vigros was very nice. Hoping that he looked masculine and sexy, the hero was confused when he heard her words. From his expression, the girl began to laugh even louder until tears came to her eyes. Suddenly, she also took a spoon and, scooping up ice cream, put it in the hero's mouth, leaving a piece on his cheek. After that, she hurried to wipe it off with her finger, deciding that she couldn't eat it so carelessly. Smiling sheepishly, Vigros knew perfectly well that she had soiled him on purpose. Looking at him slyly, the heroine winked at the cardinal, licking the ice cream from her finger. Laughing at what he saw, Vigros found this saint very amusing. At this time, people sitting around considered what they saw a sensation and wanted to urgently find out the identity of the man. After the restaurant, the heroes went for a walk, and the hero learned that Iola hates poverty. Someone thinks that happiness is not in money, but if you don't have it, then there is no chance to become happy either. After all, even such things as sleep, water, and food cost money in this world. Vigros was very surprised to hear such a thing from one of the richest families in the empire. However, her father would never transfer her fortune, and even if he did, the heroine intended to refuse. She wanted to earn money on her own to ensure a secure future for herself. To do this, Iola decided to hide the fact that she was a saint and break off her engagement to the crown prince. Hearing also that she was going to leave, Vigros hoped that she would move in with him. Pretending not to hear this, the heroine decided that she needed to earn good money if she wanted to leave home. Therefore, she also wanted to go with the hero to a deserted place and talk about the contract. However, a little later, Iola was surprised by where exactly the cardinal led her. This was the place where she first met Vigros, before her return. At that time, there was just a mess with the appearance of a kanda, and Ophid insisted on breaking off the engagement. After that, the heroine went wherever her eyes looked. Getting lost, she found herself in this place, endlessly crying about what had happened. And then, she suddenly heard Vigros's voice from above, who was surprised at how many tears flowed out of her. He wanted to talk to the girl a little earlier, but he could not while she was crying. At that moment, Yahello wondered who this stranger was and why he was watching her sobs. But as it turned out, the hero came there first, and it was she who was the uninvited guest. The heroine believed that he could at least hint at his presence, but Vigros understood that she would not hear him. With her head bowed in doom, Yahello didn't know what to do if he spread rumors. After all, if this happens, then the family will not leave the girl alone, which she was most afraid of. Seeing no other way out, she decided to offer him a reward for silence. Dangling his legs to her, the cardinal found the heroine's offer very tempting. After a little thought, he decided that for his silence, he wanted to receive payment in the form of 1 apple. Not immediately delving into what she heard, Yahello immediately became confused. Thinking that he was just messing around, the girl got tired of looking at his legs and wanted to talk face to face. Vigros was surprised because everyone liked his legs, but it seemed that she had peculiar tastes. The heroine hoped that he would stop these jokes with the apple, but the cardinal was completely serious. There was no other way out, and Yahello began to look around in confusion, looking for the right fruit. As it turned out, there were only apple trees around, but unfortunately, she could not climb them in her dress. But Vigros did not worry, because the apples were closer than it seemed, and he only needed to lower his head. Having done this, the heroine found a large and beautiful apple right at her feet. At the request of the hero, she threw him a fruit, which turned out to be the result of his 2-hour wait. Glad that he could finally enjoy it, Vigros immediately began to eat. At the same moment, a long moan came from the girl's stomach, hinting at a hungry emptiness. Sighing, the hero broke the apple into 2 pieces, intending to share it with her. Thinking that she looked like she was begging him for food, Vigros threw her half of the fruit. Lowering her head, the heroine pretended that she was just overtired and frightened. Suddenly, the cardinal jumped down from the tree, finding himself in front of the girl and wanting to know her name. She looked at him in shock, which made Vigros happy, thinking that it was because of his fabulous beauty. He also decided that she should close her mouth to prevent flies from flying in, which made Yahello think he was caring. Coming into a stupor, the hero thought that he usually does not like this, but this compliment was unique. Apparently, the heroine did not understand people because he was told about his vicious character from childhood. Vigros couldn't believe that she called him caring and decided that the heroine was devoted to those she trusted. Meanwhile, Yahello tried to see through his true face, because he was really a knight of the imperial palace. The hero also knew that someone had offended her, and then she ran away without saying a word. He did not understand why it was so important, because she was no longer a child, but the girl was even more upset by these words. Then, if there is no reason why she does not introduce herself, Vigros wanted to know the name of the heroine. Looking down sadly, Yahello knew that if he knew her name, he wouldn't be so kind to her anymore. However, gathering her strength, she decided to tell him her name, wanting to know his identity in return. Vigros was surprised to see the same Yahello, the crown prince's fiancé, sitting in front of him. It seemed strange to him that she came here, because usually people did not go to this place. Admitting that he knew the daughter of the Marquis de Ribon very well, the cardinal suddenly saw tears in the heroine's eyes. The girl knew that she was the prince's bride only in words, but in reality, everything was different. Suddenly, the hero began to wipe the tears on Yahello's face with his fingers. Suddenly, she screamed, wanting him to stop immediately, much to Vigros's surprise. He was shocked to learn that it turned out that it was painful for her, because the hero very rudely wiped away tears. Confused, Vigros thought that he hadn't done it that much, but the heroine began to wipe them herself, continuing to insist that she was in great pain. At the same moment, she roared again, falling on her face to the ground and throwing the cardinal into confusion. Smiling, he decided that the girl just needed to be given time to cry. When she finished, the sky was already covered with a veil of night, and Yahello felt embarrassed that she had detained the hero. On the other hand, she felt better, and she no longer remembered the last time she had talked to someone for so long. Thanks to the stranger, she felt better, and she was grateful to him from the bottom of her heart. The cardinal did not understand why he suffered for so long, but according to the heroine, it is difficult for some to immediately spill everything out. Looking at the moon in the night sky, Iola was shocked that so much time had passed and wanted to go home as soon as possible so as not to anger her father. After all, she has yet to tell him about the breakup of the engagement, which the Marquis will definitely not leave just like that. In addition, she was already embarrassed to detain this man, and thinking about it, she accidentally grabbed his sleeve. Realizing this, she abruptly removed her hand, apologizing for the inconvenience. The hero was shocked that she continued to be cautious, even after 5 hours of communication. If the girl is really sorry, then Vigros would like her not to run away the next time they meet. After all, it's a terrible feeling when a familiar person forgets to say hello when they meet. At this moment, the heroine suddenly wondered what the name of this stranger was. Vigros looked at her in bewilderment, amazed that she had only now decided to find out. After that, he poked Iola in the forehead with his finger, which made her confused. However, the cardinal was just wondering what exactly she was thinking about now. Then the heroine wondered if he could read the minds of others. Laughing at her words, the hero considered it impossible. It seemed strange to the girl that this very unusual man was not disgusting to her. Seeing him laughing, she was afraid that this man could actually read her mind. By slapping her, Vigros wanted this strange girl, who had been holding him hostage for 5 hours, to finally pull herself together. Remembering that she had already promised to do so, Iola vowed never to run away from him. After these words, the cardinal finally introduced himself to her, telling her his name. And now, remembering this meeting in her past life, the heroine involuntarily laughed. Vigros wondered what made her laugh, but Iola pretended that it was nothing special. She decided that this place was simple and they could be seen, but the hero had a different opinion about this place, which not everyone could get to. Then, the girl wanted to know how he managed to get here in his past life. However, this question remained on her mind, and in the meantime, Vigros stared at her. He leaned over quietly, and Iola heard a soft whisper that it wasn't a coincidence. At these words, she fell into a stupor, not understanding anything and looking at the cardinal in surprise. But he immediately decided to continue the conversation about earnings, as if nothing had happened, and the girl decided that she had imagined it. First of all, Vigros wanted to know if the heroine had any business ideas. Seeing the place where they had been sitting in their previous life, Iola decided to sit there with him. Continuing to look at her in bewilderment, the cardinal did not understand what she was up to. The heroine remembered that she learned about her power when she studied the records of the saints in the palace library. As it turned out, the power of the saints manifested itself in different ways and was not limited to healing alone. If you really want, then you can manifest it in other ways, and in this life, Iola wanted only 2 things. She wanted immeasurable wealth, which does not oblige to anything, and the power of persuasion, so that no one in this world would influence her life anymore. Deciding to show Vigros her step towards wealth, the heroine created a flower with the help of magic. However, it was composed entirely of precious crystals, beautifully shimmering with the sun's glare. The first time she got yellow flowers, but this time they were pink, and the girl wondered what it depended on. However, most of all, she was interested in the reaction of the hero, and Iola turned to him with hope. To her surprise, the cardinal froze in amazement, staring at the flower. These flowers did not smell, but did not wither either. In addition, they consisted of precious stones, so they had a high value for sale. The girl knew that only she could create this curiosity, which was supposed to fly like hot cakes. And if you also come up with a beautiful legend about them, then the price tag will definitely skyrocket. The hero realized that she wanted to take advantage of the fact that aristocrats fell for all sorts of curiosities. Therefore, in his opinion, it was necessary to involve the black market, which stunned Iola. Because of her status, the heroine will be quickly identified in the palace, but the market was a completely different matter. Seeing the confusion in her eyes, he didn't understand what exactly was bothering the girl. Everything was safe, since the owner of the black market was Vigros himself. Meanwhile, tired from work, Siana finally managed her duties. When everyone found out that she had a good relationship with Iola, the other servants began to mock her. Basically, these were the maids who still considered the mistress to be a villain. However, the girl was not going to give up because of them, and was determined to defend the honor of the mistress. To do this, now it was necessary to do everything in such a way that misunderstandings about Iola disappeared. After watching her, Siana realized that the heroine was not interested in rumors about herself, as if she had gotten used to the fact that they wanted to frame her. Such indifference on the one hand seemed amazing, but on the other hand, it looked very pathetic. Besides, Sir Kiran was still stubborn, not acknowledging his mistress, and it was necessary to find a way to change his mind. The black market was a place where nobles often frequented due to the lack of restrictions on transactions. The things sold there were priceless even for the empire, and in other words, it could be called a dark auction. Even in the original plot, the owner of this place was never mentioned anywhere. Therefore, when she learned that it was Vigros, Iola was taken aback by shock. However, she should have realized that although the cardinal skillfully speaks his teeth, he never lies. Finally realizing this news, the heroine came to the dizzying conclusion that the hero was richer than the imperial family. Accustomed to his playfulness, the girl completely forgot that Vigros was a dark man. And now she did not understand even more why then, in the original novel, everything went down the drain. After all, having got him as an ally, you could easily conquer the entire empire. Meanwhile, the hero decided that since his saint wanted this, he was obliged to make her rich. But for this, it was necessary to meet with an expert in this field, and you could either call him or go to him yourself. Realizing that they would visit Il's residence, the heroine expressed a strong desire to go on their own. Grinning and taking her hand, Vigros created a portal and invited the saint there. After a second, the girl felt the wooden floor under her feet and realized that they were in a building. At this moment, a subordinate of the cardinal was standing nearby, who was shocked by their appearance. Seeing that there was a girl with the hero, he screamed in horror, sending Vigros and Iola into a stupor. The cardinal wanted the servant to calm down at once, for they were receiving a guest. Hearing about the guest, the man put his hands to his mouth and turned blue with surprise. At this time, the cardinal introduced the girl to this screaming guy and lover of money, whose name was Rake. Hearing that the heroine's name was Iola, the servant immediately recognized her and was very surprised. However, he was more frightened that she was in such a dangerous place, in the house of this madman. Rake thought that the master had kidnapped the young lady, which was already beginning to annoy Vigros greatly. The girl herself admitted that the cardinal was quite frightening, but she did not think he was crazy. She had come here for advice on starting her own business, and according to Vigros, Rake could help her. First of all, the man found out that we were talking about the sale of the only precious flower in the world. Later, they stepped aside with Rake and began to discuss the details of the business in detail. Looking at them, it was unusual for the hero to hear laughter in these places, and the girl clearly did not fit in. The only nuance that Iola was very worried about was the lack of initial capital, but both characters did not consider this a problem. In addition, Vigros was surprised at her lack of selfish thoughts, which was completely different from the rumors about her. The secret of the precious flower was her life, so Rake insisted on putting a significant price tag. As for the initial capital, now she could freely dispose of the finances of Vigros himself. But first, it was necessary to apply for a patent so that no one would have a headache with fakes. Iola was a girl who had failed the ceremony of a saint, but who could control her own power. In addition, Vigros was sure that it was not fake, as it emitted the same sweet aroma. Then, can she be a wonderful owner of the hero's dreams and hopes? However, she periodically called him a dark man, which was incomprehensible and suspicious. The closer he got to know her, the more she became a mysterious saint, and this drove the cardinal crazy. Later, during the lesson, the heroine unexpectedly wanted to shorten her studies. Dismayed, the teacher decided that she was bored with the lessons, but in fact, the matter was different. As expected, rumors about him and Vigros spread throughout the empire. People everywhere were shouting that Lady Ribant, a candidate saint, had a lover. The girl decided to confess to the teacher that she was not going to become a saint at all. The man was even more surprised because she had tried so hard lately. Moreover, Iola even found it useful in the lessons, but her soul did not lie in this matter, and she wanted to move on to what she wanted as soon as possible. The teacher suddenly began to worry about what she might get from her parents, but the heroine decided to deal with this herself. Previously, the teacher's words brought her to tears, but at the same time, he was the first to apologize, and now he was even worried about her. Now the girl knew for sure that the characters of the novels were able to restrain their actions. She wondered if he had ever cared about Iola before he returned. In any case, she was very happy and grateful for his care. Today, for the first time, the heroine wanted to come home in a good mood, but at the entrance, the maids poured dirty water from a bucket on her. At the same time, they stood right in front of her and pretended that it was an accident, openly mocking the heroine. They really enjoyed the fact that the Marquis's daughter could not rebuff them, but no matter how you look at it, it was Akanda's fault. The heroine did not understand how the previous Iola were able to endure all this, before and after returning. In any case, it was better now, because that time they poured water on her directly from the roof of the mansion. Suddenly, the crown prince appeared, who did not understand what was going on here. At the same moment, the maids drooped abruptly, unable to find words to justify themselves. Ophid decided that since they knew who Yahello was and poured out the water anyway, they must have wanted to live. Starting to beg for forgiveness, the girls admitted their guilt, shaking all over their bodies with horror. At the same time, they themselves ceased to understand why they did this, knowing that Madame Ribon was also a noblewoman. Approaching the heroine, the prince wondered how often this happens. Learning that they treated her like this all the time, Ophid was stunned. Yahello was very surprised to see that worried look on his face again. Thinking that he was looking only at Akanda, she turned away when she saw Jane behind one of the pillars. Lady Ernest's personal servant once again spied on her, sincerely believing that she remained invisible. Of course, she would certainly report to Akanda about everything she saw and learned. Realizing this, the heroine decided that she needed to fool around a little. Turning to the prince, she didn't want His Highness to worry about her. After that, she gently clung to his chest, bringing the heir to a complete stupor. Blushing like a tomato, he didn't understand why she was doing such a thing. With a contented giggle, Yahello smiled as she stared at Jane. At this moment, Lady Ernest's maidservant was in deep shock and extremely furious. It was time for more rumors, in which Akanda cried all night because of the villainess who seduced the crown prince. Enraged beyond belief, Jane strode furiously towards her mistress's chambers. Seeing this, the girl immediately unstuck from Ophid, calmly going to the maids. Approaching the girls blue with fear, Yahello did not know how to torture them for the sake of rumors. Looking at these helpless ladies with puppy eyes, the heroine did not understand if they had just poured water on her. Although these girls were ordinary characters, it was still not a reason for condescension. First of all, she wanted to hear from them personally. Did they really hate her so much? With their minds clouded with fear and their voices trembling, the maids began to apologize again. Looking at them with disgust, the heroine decided that it was in the nature of people to apologize. However, were the girls not tormented by conscience, from the oppression of a person because of status? Yahello decided to give an example of how she would answer this question if she took hold of the tuft of hair of one of the maids. Jerking and pulling it out of her head, Yahello thought she wouldn't do anything like that. And since these girls were going to trample her, then she was not going to sit still either. But for now, let them be tormented by a sense of conscience. Looking at the sincere horror in the eyes of the girls, the heroine did not understand why she had endured this before. If the maids wanted to screw up miserably, they could continue to work hard. However, if this happens again, then next time Yahello will make them drink this goo from the bucket. After these words, the maids rushed to run away from her in tears, as if from a terrible monster. After that, the heroine calmly turned to His Highness, who was watching what was happening. Yahello was sure that Ophid would be disappointed in her because she was not as sweetheart as Akanda. However, to her surprise, this turned out to be completely wrong, which left her in a stupor. With a cough, the prince decided that he had never thought of such a thing. The heroine did not understand why he had come here, because Lady Ernest had no classes. Ophid was about to answer, but suddenly stopped in mid-sentence and froze in place. There was a distinct feeling that he wanted to say something, but could not. Yahello assumed that he had finally heard the rumors about her and Vigros. The prince has changed dramatically and now behaves differently than in the original novel and before his return. The heroine knew that if she continued to come here so often, he might be misunderstood. People want more gossip all the time, but Yahello didn't want to be the butt of the dreaded rumors anymore. Blushing with shame and embarrassment, Ophid apologized to the girl again. Looking at him carefully, she was surprised, seeing that face on him again. Now, the heir to the throne of the empire was most like a puppy abandoned in the rain. However, the heroine knew for sure that it was he who left her, so she did not fall for this. Since he had nothing to say, she was about to leave, but the prince suddenly grabbed her by the arm. The only thing Ophid wanted at that moment was for the lady to give him a minute, to which he was immediately refused. He thought it was because of his unattractiveness, but even 3-year-old children knew that he was the best suitor in the empire. Suddenly, Yahello saw his mesmerized gaze focused on her. This completely discouraged her, because the prince did not even look at Akanda like that. As it turned out, he was not interested in the opinion of others, and he took into account only the opinion of the heroine. The girl decided that he, having a kind nature, a handsome appearance, as well as the title of heir, would certainly be a wonderful husband. However, Yahello couldn't even remotely imagine her first kiss with him. After all, there was a very good reason for the fact that they would not be able to become simple friends. Ophid is the main character of the novel, and even if he has changed his preferences, Akanda will still stand his ground to the end. As a result, for sure, everything will end in the same way as in the original novel, namely, the prince will kill Iola. Perhaps he wouldn't have changed if she hadn't mentioned breaking off the engagement, then in the carriage. The crown prince was the center of this world and the protagonist of Lady Ernest. Therefore now, if he finished, the heroine wanted to leave immediately. Ophid had nothing to say, but his gaze alone said a lot. Watching his fiancé turn around and walk away, he felt immersed in impenetrable, thick darkness. As if trying to catch her, he stretched out his hand to the one that did not leave his head. The prince did not want to give up on her, although he knew that the further things went, the more absurd the situation became. For now, however, Ophid thought only of Iola and longed for her relentlessly. Caring himself, the heir did not know how to cope with these painful feelings. Late in the evening, in one of the taverns, a lady in a pink cloak was sitting at a bar, emptying mugs of beer. In deep despair, Akanda did not understand when history had managed to be so badly distorted, as originally she was to meet Vigros here. However, after sitting here for several hours, the hero did not appear, which was unbearable for a lady. The next day, Iola, along with Siana and Kirin, went to a cafe to eat ice cream. However, this was at a time when she was supposed to have classes, which greatly disturbed the maid. But the heroine believed that she could safely skip them without worrying about the consequences. To Siana's surprise, she wasn't even embarrassed by the fact that she was a candidate for Saints. There were too many goodies and fun activities around that she had not tried until now. In her previous life, Iola had never even traveled abroad, which also needed to be corrected later. Considering her past life boring, the heroine intended to live as she wanted from now on. Suddenly, Kirin decided that the mistress should not eat ice cream, as it was dirty around. In his opinion, there was complete unsanitary conditions in street food, and you need to be careful not to get a stomachache. Snatching her ice cream, Iola wanted to do whatever she wanted today and refused to listen to the knight's lectures. Looking at her with displeasure, the hero considered this behavior childish. The heroine did not understand. Was he really annoyed by the fact that he could not always grumble at her? Suddenly, a crowd of people gathered to the side, staring at something in shock. Looking in that direction, Iola wondered why the people were making such a fuss. Kirin decided to go check it out, and Siana, seeing the reason for such a fuss, was confused. It turned out to be the crown prince who had come to the cafe with Akanda. As she began to nervously move her fingers, Siana thought that perhaps her mistress was upset by what she saw. Kirin wanted Iola to stop staring at the couple so intently. First of all, the heroine calmly smiled and made it clear that she was not upset at all. Pushing the knight aside, she continued to observe, deciding to add chocolate syrup to the ice cream next time. Imagining it in her mind's eye, Siana was shocked by such a yummy. But at the same moment, remembering what was happening, she looked at the mistress again, hoping that she was really okay. It was, however, Iola didn't really remember this moment from the original story. It appears to have been the scene where Akanda was nervous before the initiation ceremony, and Ophid asked her out on a date to comfort her. This probably happened before their love story, which means that the prince has not yet fallen in love with Lady Ernest. Savoring the ice cream with pleasure, Iola was amazed at the girl's timid tears. Pretending to be Miss Kindness, Akanda impressed with her level of acting. The heroine did not see the prince's face and wondered if he was smiling now. Or maybe he was embarrassed to look at Lady Ernest, given his recent changes. In any case, Iola got tired of this boredom and decided to leave here. Later, in the sky above the mansion of the Marquis de Ribon, a black raven appeared and rushed towards the building. Flying through the window and sitting on the heroine's head, Vigros wanted to congratulate her on getting rich. After that, he began to dance on top of her head, believing that it was all thanks to him. In fact, Rake had done the patent so that Iola could sit with folded hands while the money flowed to her. Happy about this, the heroine could not even find words of gratitude from shock. The hero understood that in the beginning it was always unusual, and it was the same with him when he took over the black market. However, this was all thanks to Rake, by listening to whom, even in a dream, you can earn money. And since Vigros had helped her, he hoped that the heroine was ready to take a decisive step. But as it turned out, the girl was not idle either, although the hero knew that she was hamstering ice cream. Not expecting to hear this, Iola was stunned, thinking that in this way she was pretending that she was not interested in the saints. Thinking that she must have decided to try all the tastes, the raven began to dance on her head again. Grabbing him, the heroine decided that in case of her baldness, he would be to blame for everything. Vigros was a little worried that the Marquis might interfere in his daughter's affairs, but she was sure that he would not catch her. Rake's legal confirmation was enough, and she would have been free long ago if she had known about such a method. Despite all the genius of his subordinate, the cardinal was very indignant that he constantly insulted him and considered him crazy. Suddenly, Yahello wondered when the hero would finally become human. She also wanted to ask him if there would be any goodies today, which made the raven suddenly blushing and turning away. Surprised by his shyness, the heroine found Vigros very cute. Late at night, sitting on Ayola's bed, the hero did not understand how much she trusted him, that she was just sleeping in front of him. Lately, Rake has been grumbling a lot about the cardinal becoming weird. Vigros did a lot of idleness, did not answer questions, and was always immersed in his own thoughts. Looking at the sleeping girl, he perfectly understood who it was all about. The hero also noticed that with the appearance of Yahello in his life, he began to smile next to her. Vigros did not understand why she did not fear and despise him like everyone else. Where could such an unusual girl like her come from? The gods were not as kind as people think, and the saint born in this world did not respond even to sincere prayers. That was why Yahello, who had the power of a saint, was a wonderful creature, both for the empire and for the hero himself. Despite the fact that the saint belonged to the imperial family, the cardinal considered the girl his own. He constantly thought that when he looked at her shining eyes, he immediately began to get nervous. Or maybe it was because of the crown prince's greatly changed behavior? Most of all, Vigros wanted to protect this small, confident girl with a bright smile. And so that no one would ever hurt her, he was even ready to lock her up. However, he would not be able to do this, knowing what kind of future she needs and wanting to see her in it. Now, the hero was also wondering what Yahello was thinking about during her sleep. Hanging over her, he decided that he was very interested in this lady. Vigros's life was monotonous, and he was like a dog on a leash, always oppressed. Hostility was not enough to arouse his interest, but everything changed after meeting Yahello. Each time, he was curious to know what it would be like today. It was as if there were many portraits of a girl who had always been different, but always so attractive. Even in the face of a terrible death, the image of her came to his mind as Vigros brandished his bloody sword. On days of terrible melancholy, he sent birds to visit her, and this was repeated almost every day. But next to the heroine, there were those who always bothered her, and even the girl's family turned away from her. However, despite this, Yahello did not tremble with fear, but was absolutely confident in herself. From time to time, in front of the windows she passed, a black raven sat on the branches of trees. And at this moment, many kilometers away from the mansion, Vigros admired her straightforward gaze. It was so beautiful that the hero simply could not take his eyes off, and also the girl reacted very calmly to annoying things. As he watched her, Rake, behind him, struggled to repel the attacks of the enemy knights, indignant at his master. However, the cardinal believed that he should not shout like that, because with such skills, the servant was 2 steps away from death. Besides, even though sending birds was a rather shameless act, he didn't regret it at all. Although Vigros himself could not decide whether it was for protection or for surveillance, but in any case, he missed her very much. The moment Yahello looked at him with a smile, without fear or hatred, his heart was literally breaking. Previously, in order to get an answer to her question, the hero could harm anyone. But now this was unacceptable, and the hero was afraid that the girl would completely cool off to him. Taking her hand, he hoped that the sweet, holy Yahello would be able to remove the leash from his neck and free him from all torment. Deciding to spy on her dreams, the cardinal instantly moved into the heroine's subconscious. He found himself in her room and saw a little girl, huddled in a corner with fear, who was crying bitterly. In desperation, she begged her parents to forgive her. Feeling the rage inside, Vigros was shocked, thinking that she was dreaming all the time. And did she always curl up and cry alone? Deciding to pat the girl on the head, the hero also intends to kill all the bastards who made her cry. But before he could touch her, Yahello suddenly stopped crying and began to raise her head. After that, she stared at Vigros, which made him shudder. Not understanding what was happening, the hero was sure that she was looking at him. However, it was even ridiculous to imagine that the girl could see him now. No power in the world was capable of this, which made Vigros feel a tremor in his hands. Screaming, he tried to stop Yahello from touching him. But at the same second, seeing her palm in front of him, the hero realized with horror that he was taken by surprise. A second later, he woke up, seeing the sky in front of him and feeling the grass swaying, touching his neck. After lying there for a while, Vigros realized that this was no longer Yahello's dream. Looking at his trembling hand, the hero considered it nonsense and was also shocked by the strength of the saint. Everything happened too unexpectedly, and the cardinal was completely confused. He was just going to spy on her dream, and the heroine took and threw him out of there. Thinking that she would now make him show his dreams, the hero laughed. Raising his head and looking to the sides, this area seemed surprisingly familiar to him. Suddenly, a rustling sound was heard from behind the bushes, after which he himself, only a few years younger, appeared before Vigros. Then the cardinal realized that despite his efforts, this time could not be forgotten. It was the most painful period in his life, which the hero missed very much. Glowing and crying with happiness, the boy ran into the arms of a woman whose hair was the same dark color as his. The mother was very surprised by the appearance of Vigros, sitting in a large cage, right on the street. Looking at him carefully, she decided to find out how he ended up here. Being completely confused, the little hero wanted to leave this place immediately, together with his mother. But fear suddenly appeared in the woman's eyes, and she did not understand what to do now. The kid was also at a loss. Why was it necessary to lock his mother in the garden of the imperial palace, where no one could enter? The woman decided to pretend that she was okay, and she wanted Vigros to do nothing, and he returned immediately. After clarifying that there had been just some misunderstanding, she suddenly saw a bright light. A smile appeared on the boy's face, and wanting to return home with his mother, he cast a spell to destroy the cage. Despite the woman's attempts to stop him, Vigros instantly shattered the thick steel bars with his energy. He himself considered it obvious that his mother's imprisonment was a misunderstanding, since she was the younger cousin of the emperor himself. At the same time, his father was a loyal knight of His Majesty, as well as a duke of the empire. Hugging the woman, he thought that she was too kind, so he took everything for granted. Hearing his mother's heavy breathing after trying to stop it, the boy hoped that she was all right. However, suddenly her breathing became even, and now the woman wanted her son to listen to her very carefully. At that moment, behind them, slow, measured steps were heard in their direction. The only thing that his mother wished now was for Vigros to survive. As she watched the emperor and crown prince walk, she wanted her son to remember that mom and dad loved him. Of course, there will be difficult moments, but no matter how many misfortunes there are, you need to live. The woman also understood that one day the hero's strength would seem frightening, and he would surely want to get rid of it. But that's part of Vigros and proof that he's a blessed man. Approaching them, the emperor remembered how much he loved and cherished his cousin. Because of this, he was perplexed by her current actions. However, the woman firmly decided that she did not need the false love of His Majesty at all. Considering these empty words, the monarch suddenly heard the voice of his son, who was furious that the traitors dared to flee. At this moment, little Vigros looked at young Ophid with horror and did not understand what was happening. The father perfectly understood his son's indignation and decided to ask him how to deal with these scoundrels. Looking coldly at the hero and his mother, the crown prince decided that they needed to be killed so that this would not happen again. Becoming even more confused, Vigros did not understand why he was speaking like that and with such a fixed gaze. Meanwhile, the emperor was proud of his son for making such a wise decision. Ophid's eyes burned with anger, for these men had dared to harm his mother, but there was no sign of remorse in them. But suddenly, His Majesty decided that even in this situation, one had to be generous. First of all, he had to think about the empire that still needed Duke ill. Meanwhile, Vigros did not understand how he and his mother could be involved in Her Majesty's death. After patting his son on the head, the emperor sent him for a walk, left alone with the prisoners. In fact, he never thought that his younger cousin would turn out to be like this. Glad that he had finally found out, the woman also now opened her eyes to what a heartless person he turned out to be. The monarch was surprised that she only realized it now, because he thought that cutting off her husband's head earlier was enough for this. Furthermore, looking at the boy with disgust, the emperor didn't understand why she was hiding this scum. Did Madame dare to forget that she was part of the royal family? But she immediately demanded to stop calling her child that, looking indignantly at her cousin. Before that, he considered her to be a scum who would show strength when in danger, but as it turned out, it was the boy who was the scum. The ruler was upset that Duke Illa had been beheaded, the woman would soon die, and without this trifle the duke's place would be empty. The woman was shocked that he was still worried about the well-being of the empire, which was already in decline. However, the emperor continued to sincerely believe that everything was for the sake of her peace of mind. It was strange for a woman that he understood calm as violence. However, the monarch intended to continue to follow what he had begun. Abruptly releasing his hand forward, he grabbed little Vigros right by the face, terrifying his mother. The Emperor believed that the most important thing was that no more such garbage should be born into this world. However, even he, no matter how vile a person he was, saw love for his mother in the boy's eyes. Therefore, the monarch decided to save the life of this child if the woman promised him something. Snatching him from her cousin's hands, she realized that he wanted to make her son the crown prince's dog. In any case, Duke Il was still needed by the Empire and the imperial family in particular. Vigros did not understand what he was talking about and felt only a strong pain in his head. He only wanted to meet his mother, but now something terrible was happening. Placing her hand on his face, the woman began to use a spell to put him to sleep. Her tears dripped onto her son's face, and his mother hoped that he would be fine. Realizing that the only way to keep him alive, she agreed, after which the Emperor's sword rushed towards her neck. In his opinion, his cousin had nothing to worry about, because Vigros would now become the Duke of Il and would live for the sake of his son. At the same moment, the Emperor made a sharp swing of his sword, striking at the woman. At the same time, Vigros felt as if he had been pushed sharply in the stomach, and his breath caught in his throat. Suddenly waking up from sleep in a cold sweat, he fell to the floor, hitting his back against the wall. Suddenly, the hero heard a rustle from the side of Yahello, who woke up from an extraneous noise. Starting to look around in confusion, the girl was surprised to notice Vigros in the corner. After that, she sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at him carefully for a few seconds. Confused, the hero did not understand how to explain everything to him now. The heroine slowly got up and walked towards him, while Vigros decided to choose the words so that she would not hate him later. Leaning over and looking at him worriedly, Yahello hoped that the hero was all right. Putting her hand to his cheek, she wanted the cardinal to stop crying. Realizing that his eyes were also flowing with tears, Vigros was even more taken aback. For a while they sat on the floor, and the hero closed his eyes, enjoying the girl's touch. Suddenly she leaned her face against his, closing her eyes and languidly pronouncing his name. After that she safely buried herself in his shoulder, instantly falling asleep soundly. Vigros was shocked by what had just happened, and for a second he was already confused. Smiling, he thought that the heroine was very similar to his mother. Standing up with her in his arms, he imagined what a stupor Rake would be in if he found out about it. Gently placing the girl on the bed, Vigros thought she was really amazing. It was a mystery to him how she could make him cry with such an innocent face. At this moment, the heroine sniffed sweetly in her sleep, turning over on her other side. Touched by this, the hero leaned against her again, not understanding how it was possible to fall asleep so easily. He decided that he would not let her forget him, tempting Yahello as if in a nightmare. The next morning, Siana happily began to pull back the curtains in her mistress's room, trying to wake her up. Feeling a ray of sunlight touch her eyes, the heroine came to her senses, feeling an incredible heaviness in her head. Running up to her, the maid decided that the girl had just gone to bed very late yesterday. However, Yahello was sure that she had had some kind of strange dream, and her head was now splitting. But anyway, it was time to get up and change clothes, so a minute later, the heroine was standing in front of the mirror while Siana helped her. Yahello decided to ask the maid if she knew anything about Duke Il. However, as soon as she said his name, Siana immediately hiccuped and shuddered with fear, remembering this terrible man. Smiling and deciding to omit the subject, the girl knew that such a reaction was expected. Vigros was a symbol of fear in the Hillen Empire and the darkest figure in the novel. But Yahello completely forgot about it, because she had always been so comfortable with him. And now he was also her lover, and Siana would probably faint if she found out about it. The maid decided to clarify why the mistress asked about him, but Yahello did not want to make her hysterical, and she referred to her usual curiosity. Remembering her dream and the tears of Vigros, the heroine did not understand where it was even seen that the villain cried so much. In addition, the girl did not understand why she had such a dream at all. Both before his return and this time the cardinal never showed her his weaknesses. Yahello was confused, thinking that she was becoming too weak in front of the crying men. Looking at the pigeon outside the window, she decided that in any case, a dream was just a dream. Meanwhile, Akanda walked slowly along the water surface of the small fountain, heading towards the altar. On it, in a small box, lay a book, taking which she began to frantically turn the pages. Finally, she found information that Vigros was a ruthless man, capable of even murder. In addition, he was the most powerful man in the Empire, who could do anything for Lady Ernest. Akanda was horrified, not understanding how she had come to miss such a hero. She understood that only her life went downhill, but when exactly did something go wrong? The lady began to flip through the pages again, until at last she stopped at the place where the answer to her question was. After reading about Iola and comparing what had happened, she didn't understand how this fake had dared to ruin her perfect life. Many scholars studied the saints, but most of the finds were sealed in the library and only a few information survived. The saints were particles of divine power and the fruits of miracles, the breath of which revived the dead. They have mysterious power and are able to change everything around them with just a gesture of the hand, thanks to mercy. It was for this reason that the people of the empire fell in love with them, and besides, it was natural for the saints to marry the emperor, according to the oracle. However, no one had any idea that all this was only one part of the grandiose performance. However, there were also beings whose strength was similar to that of saints, and the first emperor, Hillen, had nicknamed them scum. They were continuously born in our world, and with them came the oracles. But the emperor did not intend to tolerate this, and forced the priests to remain silent, hiding the truth. And now, one of them, named Edis, decided to ask the high priest how long he would have to live like this. After all, did the head priest not know how many people had already been killed? Looking timidly at Addis, the high priest wanted him to calm down first. However, the oracle about the rule that a saint should marry the emperor never existed, and this greatly angered the hero. At the moment, there were only 2 saint candidates in the empire, Akanda and Iola. This means that one of them will be disgraced, and the other will live to death like a doll. Realizing that they were primarily to blame for this, the high priest was dismayed. He did not understand how the emperor dared to punish a representative of a god for using an oracle. Suddenly, they heard a crack, and when they turned around, they saw a large crack in the stone slab with writing. Edis was shocked, and the head priest was horrified that it had happened again. Will the tragedy that happened to Duke Illa a few years ago be repeated again? How many more people will die just because they were born? Running up to the manuscript, the high priest began to convulsively examine it, and as he did so, his face became more and more distorted with shock. Judging by what was written, one could conclude that the insight had already come. In his opinion, this was not the right time to do so, but Edis suddenly decided that it was God's will. As he hugged the head priest, he thought that perhaps this was their last chance for repentance. And even if the high priest was cowardly again, Edis could no longer live like this and wanted to try to change something. After all, at the moment they were not priests, but rather ordinary murderers. At that moment, the high priest remembered that a long time ago he too had an epiphany. Despite resisting the emperor and losing his leg, he tried to hide Duke Ill's secret. In the end, fearing for his life, he bowed his head to his majesty. Subsequently, his days passed with the experiences of the past days, both as a priest and as a person. Determined to put an end to this, he agreed with Edis that it was necessary to act. First of all, it was necessary to contact the others and decide on further plans together. One day, Iola was peacefully drinking tea with Shiana, and there were maids nearby who reviled her for meeting a man on the left. Hearing all this and looking into her cup, the heroine realized that after returning, she completely lost her appetite. However, the exception was the food they ate with Vigros, which was very enjoyable. Meanwhile, the maids decided that Lady Ribant had no pride at all, and that His Highness had only a khanda. As they continued to heap barbs on Iola, they infuriated Siana, who did not understand how they dared to express themselves in front of their mistress like that. However, the heroine was very happy that the rumors were spreading in full swing and wanted the maids to speak louder. But there is always a catch now. The question was, how exactly will this news reach the emperor? Given that there were a lot of people in the cafe where he and the hero were sitting, the news should quickly reach His Majesty. In any case, it was not so pleasant when you were discussed behind your back as it is now. Knowing that Ophid was the first to go to the left to Akanda, it could be understood that no matter what, Iola and Vigros would always be villains to others. Suddenly, Siana thought that she and her mistress should already be back. As it turned out, it was because of the maids, and the little maid didn't understand how they dared to insult the mistress so openly. The heroine remembered that she had something to do today, and she had to say something to the crown prince. She knew that the maids were smart, but they were only half right. Hearing that the maids were leaving, Iola decided that it was time for her and Siana to hit the road. Continuing on her way, the maid did not understand where exactly her mistress was going. On the way, they met Kiran, whose appearance surprised the heroine. Suddenly, Akanda's voice was heard from the sidelines, who did not understand whether Ophid had really done this. She wanted to know more, but the prince decided that it would be better for them to talk in the imperial palace. However, the girl saw no reason to go there because the weather was so beautiful today. Looking at His Highness gently, she also thought that his palace was boring and quiet. Iola remembered that before, when she saw them together, her heart was torn apart. It seemed that the heroine had no good stories with a happy ending. At the same time, looking at Ophid and Akanda, Iola understood that only these two could be happy. But she no longer succumbed to these feelings and now, looking at them with a smile. Seeing the heroine ahead, Lady Ernest was lost for a second, clearly not expecting to meet her here. But pulling herself together, she smiled and greeted Iola happily. Akanda didn't understand how this could happen because Lady Ribant had a lesson to do today. Without showing any emotions, the heroine knew perfectly well that the girl knew about her cancelled classes. The servants around immediately began to admire Akanda's cuteness, looking askance at Iola. Hearing contemptuous statements addressed to her again, the heroine was shocked by this novel. Lady Ernest pretended to be worried about not being able to see Iola lately. After all, she wanted to make friends with her so much, and was glad that they managed to meet so accidentally. The heroine understood that Akanda knew the original of the work and probably knew about this meeting. In a past life, Iola was cruelly tricked by this magnificent actress. Seeing the heroine's silent and thoughtful gaze, Lady Ernest decided that she was angry with her because of the last meeting. Iola understood what would begin now, after these words, because of Akanda's manner of pretending to be a victim, everyone would despise the heroine. This also applied to the Crown Prince, however. His face only expressed concern, not disdain. This surprised Iola very much, as well as Lady Ernest, who expected a completely different effect. After all, in the original, Ophid at that moment looked threatening, and bitter hatred burned in his eyes. Did he not even know who started it, or did he guess that it was Akanda's doing? Lady Ernest knew that she was the main character adored by everyone, and brazenly took advantage of it. In her previous life, she even locked herself in with Iola and decided to bet on who the prince would believe, after which she slapped herself on the cheek. That time, standing nearby, Ophid heard a bang from the blow, and Akanda's piercing scream aimed at the heroine. Opening the door leading to them, he ran into the room, not understanding what was happening. Lady Ernest sat on the floor, holding her flushed cheek with tears and sobbing in pain. The prince immediately rushed to her aid, and at that moment, goosebumps ran through Iola's body. Akanda pretended to anger the heroine, for which she received from her, but she also did not want Ophid to blame Iola. Looking at the girl humbly, she pretended to feel sorry, after which Lady Ernest admitted her guilt. Iola was shocked by her words, believing that Akanda did not need to say that. However, the prince naturally believed Lady Ernest and did not give the heroine the opportunity to justify herself. Looking at Iola indignantly, he did not understand how she could be so cruel, since Akanda had just recovered from the kidnapping. Before that, Ophid dreamed of hoping that the heroine would turn out to be a good girl, but apparently, he was wrong. And now, Lady Ernest's voice pushed Iola out of her thoughts, after which she apologized for being distracted. First of all, the heroine respectfully greeted the little son of the empire in a curtsy. Ophid found out that she was coming after class, and as it turned out, Iola did not want to interfere with their pleasant pastime. In addition, the heroine sincerely hoped that Akanda did not harbor a grudge against her because she was late with the greeting. However, the reason was that it was necessary to greet His Imperial Majesty, the Crown Prince, first. Because Lady Ernest was everyone's favorite, she completely lost all manners. Therefore now, her face was distorted and gloomy with angry shock, which greatly puzzled the prince and the servants around him. Realizing this and apologizing, the girl nervously referred to the fact that she was so happy to meet Iola that she could not hold back her emotions. She also apologized to Lady Ribant, but the heroine felt embarrassed about it. After all, in her opinion, everyone could make a mistake, which Akanda immediately agreed with, realizing that she had just admitted her own in public. Iola hoped that next time, Lady Ernest would be more careful, for not everyone has such a kind heart as His Highness. Seeing how Akanda's face was distorted again, the heroine decided that it was time to end it. Barely holding back a shiver, Lady Ernest clutched her dress in her hands and thanked Iola. At this moment, the heroine wondered if she really wasn't an actress. Suddenly, Akanda thought that since they had met, she could spend some time together. After all, they hadn't even had time to talk to each other properly, and this had to be fixed urgently. Moreover, Lady Ernest even prepared refreshments on the terrace, which surprised Iola even more. Hearing no answer, Akanda decided that the heroine was still angry with her, but Iola understood that the lady was again trying to accuse her of a crime. Then the heroine decided that there was no anger, but she was worried about His Highness. First of all, Yahello wanted to know what the prince thought of her joining them. For although they were close friends, Lady Ernest for some reason did not specify his opinion. From such words, Ophid was confused and agreed, and Akanda was shocked that the heroine behaved completely differently. In turn, Yahello realized that Lady Ernest was trying to stick to the original plot of the novel. This means that their meeting was supposed to happen much later, but it happened today. Thinking about this and grinning contentedly, the heroine began to think about what to do now in the first place. Meanwhile, Rake and the knights were desperately trying to revive Wigros, who was in a trance. The big problem was that it seemed that the master was now using his strength. However, if he overdoes it, then side effects can occur. Rake was sure that Wigros would stop doing this when he heard about the message from the temple. When the hero uttered these words, the cardinal barely perceptibly moved his head, but he never came to his senses. News came from the temple about a fake relationship, and the knights did not know what to do with it now. But Rake decided that they would only find out about it when the master finally came to his senses. Meanwhile, Yahello was peacefully drinking a cool drink on the terrace, in the company of Ophid and Akanda. However, the heroine is tired of hearing how Lady Ernest talks in detail about her relationship with the prince. At some point, she decided that it was time for her to leave, which greatly surprised Akanda. Making a sad face, Lady Ernest thought it was because she had been talking so much. Hearing her apology, Yahello was taken aback because Akanda must have deliberately exposed her relationship with the prince. Previously, hearing about this, the heroine would have begun to worry and suffer, but now she just decided that she has a very tight schedule. Lady Ernest pretended to be worried about the very busy Yahello, who also had very few classes for saints lately. Hearing also that the teacher was worried, the heroine remembered how she herself shortened them, coordinating this with the teacher. Ophid was utterly perplexed to learn that Yahello was having trouble with her lessons. Looking at her in surprise, he didn't understand why there were fewer of them. Not understanding why he was so interested in her, Yahello pretended that there was no particular reason. In addition, there were a lot of activities these days, but this was not the case before, so she just went back to her previous rhythm. However, Ophid felt that the reduction was tantamount to a reluctance to become a saint. Not expecting such a verdict from him, Yahello was even confused for a second that Akanda noticed. Looking intently at the heroine, Lady Ernest decided that under no circumstances should she give up. After all, no one knows which of the two of them will eventually become a saint. She believed that in order to correctly interpret the essence, it was necessary to attend lessons. Smiling back, Yahello didn't know if she wasn't working hard enough because she was just adjusting the classes to suit herself. Looking worried, Akanda didn't want to challenge her to rivalry, but she had to try harder than others. However, the heroine decided that she was already doing enough, and besides, she did not need her assessment at all. Shocked by her response, Lady Ernest thought that Yahello was just upset that she had made too much progress. But the heroine was only amused because they talked about completely different things. In tears, Akanda began to apologize to her, clarifying that she just wanted to talk to her. Yahello did not understand how to respond rudely to this crying face, but at the same time, if the heroine were in her place, everything would be different. First of all, she decided to ask Siana what her schedule was today. According to the maid, her mistress needed to go to the center, where she was already late, so she had to leave immediately. In this case, the heroine decided that she should already go and got up from the table. Walking up to Akanda and holding out her hand, Yahello hoped that the lady would not think that she was really angry with her. At this moment, the girl felt a tremor in her body again, and her face turned blue from shock. Suddenly, Akanda had an idea, after which she took the heroine's hand with a smile. However, at the same second, she knocked over her chair and began to fall, pretending to be pushed by Yahello. Lady Ernest knew that since she was very thin, this could easily happen. According to the original story, this happened, after which the prince immediately caught her, and the maids around were alarmed with horror. In this scenario, Yahello will certainly become a villain, putting Akanda in the spotlight. Therefore now, he carefully looked at the heroine, believing that her ridiculous expression was worth it. To her dismay, however, Yahello stood with a calm smile holding Lady Ernest's hand. By catching her in the fall, she saved Akanda in plain sight. Lady Ernest was confused as she looked at the heroine's casual smile, which she had never seen on her before. Yahello decided that Akanda must have weak legs, and of course it was good to study, but she could not forget about walks. In addition, the heroine knew that she also had anemia and advised her to go to the doctor, and in the meantime, the prince ran up to them. At that moment, Lady Ernest felt a wave of fear wash over her, and the unknown clouded her mind. Gently supporting her, Iola was surprised that Akanda managed to fall, even though no one even touched her. Grudging her teeth with frustration and anger, Lady Ernest tried to say something. But the heroine did not allow her to do this, deciding to clarify with Gianna how it happened. The maid fully agreed with the mistress's words, because she was standing next to her and saw everything. Not only she, but everyone, including the prince, had seen Akanda nearly fall, but Iola had heroically saved her. Ophid stared at Lady Ernest, puzzled, wondering what had come over her. Smiling and looking into her eyes, the heroine realized that she had already deceived the lady several times. Surely Akanda had already wondered why Iola had hired a maid who didn't even exist in her previous life. And no matter how sad it was for Lady Ernest, but the heroine no longer intended to harm herself. Hoping that the girl would be more careful next time, Iola was glad that everything was okay and was about to leave. Akanda did not answer her, looking around in confusion, while Ophid, meanwhile, looked very serious. The heroine began to calmly leave, accompanied by her servants, and the prince suddenly followed her. He grabbed her hand as he walked, and Iola looked at him dumbfounded. She didn't understand what Ophid wanted, because he already knew that she had a busy schedule. The heroine thought that it would be strange to plan something else with him, but as it turned out, the prince originally wanted to meet her. Iola was struck by the fact that he spoke as if there was already some kind of agreement between them. At this moment, the prince could not find what to answer him, bitterly remembering what had happened some time ago. From his servant, he learned that Lady Ribant had refused to respond to his invitation. However, Ophid thought it impossible that she really felt that way about him. Chasing various thoughts in his head, he abruptly grabbed his head, frightening the servant greatly. Hearing from him an offer to call a doctor, the prince immediately refused, deciding that everything was fine with him and he just needed to rest. For some reason, in spite of everything, Ophid was unshakably sure that Lady Ribant loved him unconditionally. Therefore, the fact that she did not respond to the invitation letter like this was incredible and strange. Feeling a strong stuffiness, he decided to go and take a short walk in the garden. As he opened the door of his office, he heard two knights talking about the latest news about Lady Ribant. Hearing that she was in the carriage with a man, the prince froze in surprise. The knights were shocked by her behavior, believing that this lady had completely lost her mind because she had a fiancé. But suddenly, seeing His Highness and realizing that he had heard everything, the soldiers were horrified and greeted him. Ophid made no reply and walked on, leaving the knights in utter despair of their long tongues. And now Iola wondered if the prince had come here to meet her. It seems that Ophid forgot that despite their engagement, they did not exchange letters. Therefore, whatever his intentions, he must know that this situation may be unpleasant for the heroine. The prince himself understood that he only wanted to see her, but there was no other option, because, as she noticed, they were not close. Ophid considered it his fault, and looked sadly at the girl, who at that moment remembered that she really already had an obligation. Then His Highness decided to clarify whether it was a man, which made her completely taken aback. He believed until the last moment that she was not dating him, because Iola was not like that. Completely unaware of her, the prince did not even notice how Akanda was behind him. At this time, the heroine still wanted to hear Ophid's opinion about what kind of person she is, but the prince only continued to look at her in confusion, unable to find words to answer. Iola found it amusing that he looked like an abandoned puppy again. However, now she did not understand what was better to do, because today was Genus's birthday. To go there meant to suffer because of relatives, and to stay here also did not bode well. In any case, he had to hurry before Ophid said something else. Suddenly, Akanda wondered if the heroine was really going to leave. At this moment, only Iola could see her face and had a sinister grin on it. Not understanding what had amused her so much, the heroine heard a sharp crash from the broken glass. Seeing the shards fall from the shattered window, the maid screamed in horror. Meanwhile, returning to Kim Ji-young's body, the heroine saw a truck in front of her, which did not have time to brake. As she became Iola again, her body froze as if bound by invisible chains. At this moment, Akanda screamed in fear, clutching her head and closing her eyes. But suddenly, just for 1 second, she opened her eyes, looking at Iola with a smile. Noticing this, the heroine realized that everything would continue until the very end. Kiran was horrified by what was happening, rushing to the girl. At the same time, Siana stood to the side, covering her mouth with her hand and unable to suppress a shiver. The shards rushed down, and Iola suddenly found herself sealed to the ground, a man's body. Meanwhile, Akanda was also on the ground, with Kieran lying on top of her, shielding her from the shrapnel with his body. Looking at her mistress, Sienna sincerely hoped that she was okay. Coming to her senses after what happened, the heroine was surprised to find Ophid on her, who covered her with his body. Putting her on his lap, the prince hoped that Iola was fine and began to examine her. At this moment, he himself was bleeding from several places, including his head. The heroine was completely confused by what was happening, not understanding why he was looking at her like that. Seeing the wound on his head, she unconsciously reached out her hand to heal him. Noticing this, Ophid looked at her in bewilderment, not understanding what Iola was up to. He abruptly threw away his hand. The heroine pretended that she was not going to do anything and that everything was fine with her. Smiling at her, the prince was inexpressibly glad of this, unable to take his eyes off Iola. Meanwhile, the heroine's mind became blurred from shock, and she stopped thinking about anything. Remembering how she almost gave herself away by healing the prince, Iola did not understand whether she still had the restraint of the original heroine. Later, sitting in his office, the heir recalled how the girl sincerely thanked him for her salvation. He then decided that she should not take the events to heart. After that, Iola stared at him with a misty gaze for a while before leaving. Before leaving, she also thought that Ophid should take care of his wound rather than hers. And now, the prince's heart was jumping out of his chest because she had noticed it. Although Akanda was nearby, the heroine remained alive thanks to the fact that Ophid saved her. However, she left with the knight who saved Lady Ernest without any hesitation. And then, if Akanda hadn't clung to him, the prince would have followed Iola. Therefore now Ophid himself did not understand, has he always been like this? Looking at him, the servant decided that perhaps His Highness was unwell from the injuries he had received. Then the prince thought that he really looked strange, and then the servant decided to be honest, admitting that it was so. Laughing, Ophid thought so too, which puzzled the butler even more. But be that as it may, thanks to the wound, Iola will now certainly remember him. And the prince really hoped that this would really stir up her feelings for him. Now Ophid felt inside as if he had just been released from prison. The servant was even more surprised to hear such words, and completely ceased to understand His Highness. Suddenly, the prince gave him the order to start investigating the case that Akanda wanted to hide from that day. She personally confessed to Ophidu that she would not have wanted to escalate what had happened earlier. He would have listened to her and hidden it. But when the prince saw the heroine walk away, he wanted to kneel down and start begging for forgiveness. Looking at her back, he had a strange feeling that he had seen it before. In addition, Iola constantly came to Ophidu in nightmares, giving him no rest. He was sure that she was constantly crying, and all this was because of him. Seeing his upset face, the servant thought it was because of the pain in the wound and wanted to call a doctor again. However, the prince decided that he would just rest and get it all over, and he also wanted reports at the end of the investigation. Later, when he was alone, he remembered Iola's question about whether he knew what kind of person she was. Going to the window, he decided that he had not said that he knew her very well. Meanwhile, Iola was riding home in her carriage to Genus's celebration and pondering what had happened. Looking out the window, the heroine realized that a lot had changed since she returned. She herself was proof of this, and of course, others could change too. As they arrived at the house, Kieran unexpectedly gave her his hand, leading her out of the carriage, much to Iola's surprise. But suddenly he also fell to his knees in front of her, which finally puzzled her. She decided to clarify right away that she didn't have the energy to argue. Besides, she still had to attend this banquet. But suddenly the knight thought he was wrong, causing her to be stunned. Kieran realized that although he was her guard, he had saved not her, but the other lady at the moment the glass fell. The heroine slowly stretched out her hand to him, and at that moment, the hero looked into her eyes. They were like glass beads that reflected his image, but there was no hope in them. Had she always looked at him like that, from the very beginning of their acquaintance? Why did the knight feel despair when he looked at this lady? In the beginning, he didn't even want to be her knight, as she was an evil, fake saint who tormented Akanda. But now, the question of whether this girl was really a villain and a fake flashed through Kieran's mind more than once. Since when did his nobility fall into the trap of such limited thinking? Not understanding when it all began, he first wanted to ask for forgiveness. Kieran knew that her mistress might not want to see him as her knight anymore. However, even so, the hero was determined to do everything to protect her from that moment on. Smiling, the heroine decided that it was too late for this, which is why the knight was confused. Most of all, Iola wanted him to take good care of her in the future. After that, she went to her brother's birthday banquet, where she was immediately condemned. People discussed aloud her festivities to the left of the prince, speaking disparagingly of the heroine. In shock that she heard all this, Iola thought that such a life of a villain awaits her. Now she was glad that she had let Siana go with Kiran, because even for the daughter of the Marquis, it was too much. Approaching the table with glasses, the heroine met the eyes of her mother. Breaking away from small talk, the woman looked at her furiously while clattering loudly. Iola was tired of looking at her and those around her, like monkeys in a zoo. Were all people the same, regardless of honor and dignity, and did these aristocrats have any honor at all? They were all more like animals waiting for the moment. Looking around, she also met the eyes of her father and brother, who were wary at the sight of her. Iola thought that if it weren't for the banquet, she would have already killed everyone, as her patience was on the verge. Suddenly it dawned on her that the rumor about Vigros must have already reached her father's ears. Suddenly, her aunt approached the heroine with her daughter, who did not understand what it was. Iola remembered that in the original story, this woman tried to humiliate her at every opportunity. Previously, the heroine did not really notice this, but now everything has changed dramatically. The aunt was sure that her daughter was more suitable for the role of a saint now. She tried to reproach the heroine for not greeting her. Iola knew that despite her position, no one would doubt her rudeness. Sighing heavily, she felt incredibly tired from everything that had happened and was still happening. Looking at her aunt, the heroine was surprised by such a greeting because it was so impolite that she did not even understand. Hearing such a harsh answer from her for the first time, the woman fell into a stupor for a few seconds. While she was indignant at Iola's impudence, the heroine noticed the frightened look of her brother looking at her. Apparently, he was just afraid that she might ruin the holiday. However, today the girl was not in the right mood. Thinking about this, Iola suddenly felt streams of water, which her aunt splashed into her from her glass. At the same time, the woman continued to be indignant at the shamelessness of this lady, to the satisfied cackle of her daughter. Seeing that water splashed on the floor, the heroine considered it a real absurdity. Before that, she had thought that the rest of the time would go smoothly, but now, Iola resolutely headed to the waiter. The young man decided that she needed help, but the heroine only took a glass of wine standing on a tray in his hands. Looking at how she leisurely filled the glass to the top, the aunt did not understand what she was doing. Filling the glass to the brim, Iola turned to her with a smile, after which she poured all the wine on the woman and her daughter. The aunt remained standing in confusion, to the surprised exclamations of the guests around. The heroine decided that although she had been silent before, she now decided to repay in kind. Of course, it was unpleasant that there was no water at hand, but, in Iola's opinion, it was even better. Finally, recovering from the shock, the aunt and daughter began to furiously shout at the heroine, considering her a brainless girl. They didn't understand how she dared to come here at all, and as it turned out, Iola simply had nothing to do. The woman rushed at the heroine, wanting to grab her, but suddenly heard a call for caution from her. At the same moment, tripping over the carpet, the aunt flew to the table with treats. Iola was perplexed at how clumsy her aunt turned out to be, who had even been warned in advance about caution. After a short time, the carriage with the angry aunt and her daughter went home. Feeling incredibly humiliated, the woman considered the heroine an ordinary idiot. At the same time, her daughter sobbed loudly, thinking that she looked just terrible. But his mother was sure that she had always been beautiful, and that she was to blame for everything. The girl hoped that her mother would punish the villain, and the woman decided that she had nothing to worry about. Knowing Gina's, Iola would get off with a light punishment, but her aunt decided that now she would not be left behind. Suddenly, the carriage began to shake, causing both ladies to complete bewilderment and horror. At the same time, Wigros watched them through a magic ball and used a spell to shoot down the carriage. At the same time, he watched with a satisfied look as the carriage turned over and began to roll headlong through the forest. Rake, who was standing next to him, couldn't believe that the master was smiling as he looked at this cruel scene. But the hero considered this woman stupid, because she probably did not even understand why she was treated like this. And how did she dare to treat his precious saint like that? The cardinal planned to kill her, but it seems that this did not work out. However, Rake was fed up with all his antics and wanted his master to stop attracting so much attention to himself. Taking a paper from the table and tearing it in half, the hero decided that in this case, he would do this. Looking at the smoke that appeared, Rake decided that it was better for the master not to touch it in this state. Meanwhile, Iola was still locked in her room. She wondered if in this world people didn't know about human rights, and besides, even her angry father hadn't come running. Suddenly, the door opened and Siana looked in, hoping that her mistress was okay. But the heroine felt good, since it was not the first time she was locked up, and she wanted to know what was wrong with her father. As it turned out, the carriage in which the aunt was traveling suddenly overturned, and the Marquis of Ribant drove there. Stupefied by the sudden news, Iola did not understand what was happening. Letting go of the servant, she began to laugh loudly, deciding that there was karma in this filthy world after all. It was just wonderful because it would be a shame to let that woman go just like that. Suddenly, she saw a basket of apples near the window, which was definitely not there before. Smiling, the heroine realized that a gentleman raven had recently visited her. Thinking that it was just painful for him to watch her starve to death, Iola immediately reached for the treat. After eating a few apples, she found a postcard from Vigros at the bottom of the basket. However, when she saw the rainy forest on the back of the card, she was confused. But suddenly, the heroine realized that he was watching again, and perhaps the hero had something to do with what happened to the aunt's carriage. In addition, the cardinal also considered Iola to be a good girl, which was written in the postcard, which made her laugh. The next day, 2 knights unexpectedly came to the heroine and each brought a basket of flowers. This left Iola in a stupor, because she did not expect that everything would turn out this way. After carefully examining the messengers, she came to the conclusion that they were an exact copy of their masters. The crown prince was the first to send a bouquet, and, having learned about this, Vigros also sent flowers, of which there were more than 5 times. In addition, the cardinal also sent cosmos, which meant happiness in love and personal life, and was also a symbol of affection. Sighing languidly, the heroine could not believe that Vigros knew the language of flowers. But her dreams were interrupted by a knight from the prince, who immediately demanded an answer for His Highness. It was clear from his eyes alone that he did not understand how this fake saint dared to exchange letters with the crown prince. Looking at him with a smile, Iola thought aloud that His Highness had clearly made a mistake with his assistant. After all, the heroine did not ask to send her flowers, and then a knight unknown to her demands an answer from her. Confused and automatically putting his hand on the sword, the warrior did not understand what the mistress meant. Seeing his hand and sword, Iola concluded that the knight had forgotten where and in front of whom he was now. At the same moment, he hid his hands behind his back in fright, becoming confused and turning away. Approaching the cardinal's warrior, she wanted to convey her deep gratitude to his master for such a wonderful gift. As the prince's knight shook his head in confusion, the warrior of Vigros remembered something important. Inside the basket from the duke, there was a note written by him personally for the mistress. Surprised, Iola thought that in this case, perhaps she should give an answer. However, as it turned out, Iola only needed to read the note when she was alone. Unable to stand it, the prince's knight, insulted by his mistress, decided to leave and report everything to His Highness. Taking the basket with him, he furiously walked away, under the bewildered gaze of the heroine. She did not understand who he was going to complain to, because the crown prince would take her side when he found out about everything. After that, she said goodbye to the duke's knight and safely returned to the chambers with the gift. In the room, she took out a note, and it turned out that Vigros was planning to steal it. Later, when the knight returned to the cardinal, the hero wondered how the heroine reacted. After learning that she was happy, he also wanted to know how the messenger reacted. As it turned out, he smiled very broadly, which also pleased the duke. Most of all, however, Vigros was pleased that Iola was able to recognize the language of these flowers. Getting out of bed, the hero put his feet on the flowers given by the prince, which now lay in a pool of blood. The cardinal decided that after he trampled on the crown prince, he would certainly fulfill all his wishes. He couldn't believe that Ophid dared to disturb his precious saint. Those words spoken by the prince many years ago in the imperial garden, addressed to the hero and his mother, still resounded in the mind of Vigros. He wondered if the arrogant prince would still despise him if the hero found out about his true feelings. But perhaps it would be better to continue pretending that he knew nothing. The cardinal considered Ophid a coward who was not satisfied with his father and mother. He also wanted to take the saint away from him. Meanwhile, the corpse of the prince's envoy lay to the side, bleeding. Looking at him, Vigros decided that he no longer needed him and ordered the knight to remove him. The warrior at this moment thought that the master was thus pointing out to Mistress Iola what kind of person she was dating. Starting to choose an outfit, the hero did not know what his precious saint would like. A little later, the heroine also decided to choose an outfit for a walk. Her heart fluttered violently, even though everything was known beforehand. Besides, Iola wondered if Vigros had chosen the flowers for the gift himself. But not sure if the hero was capable of such a thing, she decided that perhaps it was his servants. At this moment, Siana wondered what her mistress was thinking. As it turned out, the heroine simply could not decide what to wear. Fortunately, everyone has gone to visit her aunt, so no one will find fault with her outfit. Seeing the dress chosen by the mistress, her maid was delighted, believing that the heroine in it shone even brighter. Turning to her with a smile, Yahello was very pleased to hear such a compliment. But suddenly, Xian wondered if the lady had a boyfriend, not counting the crown prince. Not expecting such a question from her at all, Yahello hung for a few seconds. Other maids immediately began to reproach the baby, referring to her childhood. Suddenly, the heroine approached her and the girls really hoped that she would not hit her. But at the same moment, Yahello's palm plopped down on the top of Siana's head and she stroked her head. The heroine agreed with her, and besides, His Highness was more suited to Lady Ernest, which meant that she could do what she wanted. Then the maid wondered if this man loved and appreciated his mistress. Yahello remembered that she was not only a candidate for sainthood, but also the bride of the crown prince. When rumors spread that she was dating someone else, people started looking down on her, as if they knew it was going to happen. However, it was clear from the face of this sweet little girl that she wished Yahello only happiness. Noticing that Siana also looked a lot like Sol, Yahello stirred her hair again. Also, the maid had nothing to worry about, because this young man took care of her mistress, and they had a lot of fun and good together. The other maids looked at each other in surprise, and Siana decided that if the mistress was happy, then she was happy too. As a result, there was a new problem in the form of Kiran, who did not want to let the mistress go alone, considering it dangerous. Prior to that, the heroine considered him a weak knight who thought only of Akanda. He even looked quite frail on the outside, but now it seemed to Yahello that he was worried about her. Suddenly, Siana appeared, grabbed the knight's hand and took him aside, wanting to talk to him. Shocked by such a maneuver, Kiran turned back to the heroine, desperately calling out to her. But Yahello, holding her dress, was already running at full speed to the side, bursting into ringing laughter. Turning to her servants, she wished them a good time and hoped to see each other later. Siana was shouting wishes after her too, and Kiran stood with his mouth open, shocked by what was happening. As she walked on, Yahello wondered how long she hadn't run like this. Besides, if it weren't for Siana's ingenuity, she would still be held captive by Cyrene. From the very morning, the heroine found it difficult to control her excitement. Perhaps it was because she was about to see Vigros. Rushing into the forest, she saw the hero on a small edge, where he was already waiting for her. Noticing how much she was sweating, the cardinal immediately realized that she was running quickly. Then he immediately decided to sit down with her so that the heroine could catch her breath a little. Sitting down on a bench, Vigros demonstratively ruffled his hair, showing off an expensive suit. Unable to withstand such an onslaught of beauty, Yahello sighed languidly, looking at him. The Duke took it as a compliment, and the heroine decided that he really tried today. Before that, she had once heard the opinion that there is always a halo behind beautiful people. Looking at Vigros now, she saw for herself that it was the truth. Suddenly, the hero moved closer, which immediately made the girl shudder. Yahello didn't understand why he had to dress so nicely, since she couldn't even focus her attention now. Besides, since when did the hero begin to smile so easily, which he had never done before? The heroine did not understand why she suddenly began to like his smile so much that even her heart was ready to explode. Suddenly, the cardinal's gaze became serious and he stared intently at Yahello's face. Running his hand over her cheek, he suddenly realized that there was a wound, which made the heroine confused. She could not even imagine how Vigros felt when he noticed her. Looking at him, Yahello was in a stupor because she believed that no one would know about this wound since she had healed him with the magic of the saints. It all happened very suddenly, and when the prince saved her from the shrapnel, one of them hit her on the cheek, but no one noticed it due to panic. Vigros was perplexed, because did she really think he was like everyone else? He wanted to personally catch the one who broke the window and the one who saved her in order to kill them all. At least the heroine has no scar left, because she healed herself with the power of the saint. However, even so, the hero would still like to be next to her in dangerous moments. Surprised at his words and behavior, Yahello silently and intently looked at him. Looking again at the place where the cut had been, the cardinal decided that he would certainly kill the one who had done it. However now, how exactly they would get rid of the intruder depended directly on the heroine. Therefore now the Duke wanted to hear words of gratitude from her for holding out so much and not killing that bastard. At this moment, Yahello remembered the rumors that Duke Illa was able to silence even a crying child. After that, he suddenly kissed the girl on the lips, sending her into a stupor. That was enough to be grateful, and the heroine, meanwhile, didn't understand what had just happened. Vigros was sure that if he had been around, not a single hair would have been harmed. Taking a lock of Iola's hair in his palm, the hero decided that now it was only him in front of her. Therefore, he wanted the heroine to think only about him at this moment. After a while, in the late afternoon, they were again sitting on the veranda in one of the restaurants. The girl, meanwhile, recalled how, finding herself in this novel, she also remembered Kim Ji-young's past life. Iola did not understand if there were even stranger situations in her life. Sweating with excitement, she was sure that this moment was the strangest. Looking at the smiling cardinal, she didn't understand who he really was. Besides, hadn't she gotten used to him too quickly, as if they had known each other for a long time? Touching her arm, the Duke did not understand why Iola looked at him so rarely. At that moment, he seemed very cute to the heroine, which made her embarrassed. But when she came to her senses, she became wary of his behavior, thinking that perhaps the hero just drank a little. Deciding not to hesitate, she immediately wanted to know if Vigros had been drinking before the meeting. She considered the reason that the hero's gaze was somehow absent-minded. The hero was surprised that she says this to her lover, who looks at her with a smile. But in the girl's opinion, they were not real lovers, and she could not get used to his too frequent smile. Smiling again, Vigros decided that he was smiling because he liked her. Taken aback by this, the heroine thought that he must have really gone crazy. Realizing that she had said it out loud, Iola covered her mouth with her hand in embarrassment and looked at the hero. Looking away, the cardinal was glad that she liked the flowers he had sent. However, if she decides to hate him, then Vigros will annoy her even more. Thinking that he had a pleasant character, the heroine decided that she had really fun today. And although the Duke really started it all for fun, he really liked Iola. Their relationship may be fake, but Vigros liked it so much that he couldn't help smiling. Iola still decided to find out from him why he was in such a good mood. But the hero pretended not to know and decided that the heroine could guess herself. Iola thought that this would be possible if she could read the fates of other people. Then Vigros wondered if a saint could do such a thing. However, the heroine decided that the Duke should finally stop joking like this. After that, she defiantly put on a hat, hiding the redness under it from embarrassment. As he bent it, Vigros wondered if it would be too sad to leave like this. But she did not want him to get so close, because it is dangerous for the heart, and then the hero realized that he was too handsome. Iola suddenly realized that she was beginning to succumb to his influence, just like Akanda in the original. In the novel, after grabbing Lady Ernest, he didn't understand why she was looking at him like that, but the girl just wanted to leave. Feeling a burning desire and uncontrollable greed gnawing at him, Wigrosa continued to want this woman. He was like a blind crow rushing towards the sun, but doesn't the sun shine for everyone? The cardinal was annoyed by Akanda's kindness, and he went mad around her. He became like a wild animal that had lost its mind. However, Lady Ernest tried to break free from his embrace, believing that she did not need any of this. Most of all, Akanda wanted to say goodbye to the Duke and just go home. Then Wigros wondered, if he kills the guy next to her, then she will belong to him? Would Lady Ernest be only with him if he robbed her of everything she held dear? Horrified by his words, Akanda did not understand why he was saying this. But the reason was only that the hero sincerely loved the girl and did not want to let her go. After all, in the end, she will get scared and run away, after which the sun will go out. And then, in the cardinal's arms, only the skin of the girl he wants will remain. As Iola remembered this content, her face expressed deep horror, and the hero suddenly called out to her. Not understanding what was happening to her, he handed her a spoon with a piece of cake on it. Seeing the confusion in her eyes, he decided that she was just remembering something bad. Bending down to eat the cake, the heroine was annoyed that such a content of the novel comes to mind. After that, she safely ate the cake from the spoon held out by Vigros, smiling at him. At this moment, the eyes of everyone around them were fixed on them, and everyone was shocked by what was happening. Later, when night fell on the ground and the moon rose majestically in the sky, the imperial castle was filled with an atmosphere of peace. The only person in it who did not like it now was Prince Ophid, who again had nightmares in his dreams. Suddenly, the window was touched by passing birds, which made him jump up in a cold sweat, screaming. Immediately, a knight ran up to him, hoping that His Highness was all right. Calmly closing his eyes, Ophid decided that everything was fine with him and the guard could leave. Not the first time, but the knight agreed to leave him and safely left the crown prince's chambers. The heir did not understand why he was tormented by this terrible dream again. There were different situations in it, such as when he held Iola in his arms, trying to bring her to her senses, or when he was sitting on the bed and she was lying on his lap and tears flowed from the heroine's eyes. After that, another scene united them with everything that had never happened before. After all, Ophid had never seen Iola cry in front of his eyes or in his presence. This annoyed him a little, because he had never asked her to be polite to him. Suddenly, another knight came in to greet His Highness. Like the previous one, he was also ordered by the Crown Prince to leave immediately. But as it turned out, the knight brought His Highness a report on the work done. From it, Ophid learned that the knight who had been sent to Iola with flowers had returned dead. Furiously squeezing the paper, he clarified that it was indeed true. Realizing that this was almost no different from a dream, the prince looked out the window thoughtfully. Both now and in his dreams, Ophid could not cheer up the heroine, no matter how hard he tried. However, this disgusting guy sent him a knight's head, as if boasting. From this, the prince deduced that Duke Illa was just laughing at him, along with Iola. Horrified by what was happening, Ophid did not understand if Wigros was planning to take what belonged to him again. Meanwhile, the heroine and the cardinal sailed on a boat along the river, admiring the reflection of the starry sky in the water surface. Noticing the smile on the hero's face again, Iola still did not understand since when he smiled like this. Looking at her carefully, he pretended that he did not know what it was about. Hearing that he was smiling all the time, Vigros decided that it was only happening around her. The heroine wondered if he had now begun to play the role of a lover who was embarrassed after such pleasant words. Laughing, the Duke thought that perhaps the girl simply did not trust him. Clarifying that it was a joke, Iola laughed as well, and then stole a glance at him. But as it turned out, if she continued to look like this, Vigros might not be able to stand it. The heroine believed that she was just playing staring, but in the cardinal's opinion, she was testing his patience. It was dangerous to provoke like that, especially if it was about him. Screaming at what she heard, Iola remembered that the terrible Duke Illa was sitting in front of her. If people find out that he talks so rudely, then everyone will be shocked. After clarifying this, the girl scooped up water from the river with her palm and sprinkled it on the hero. After that, he fell silent, and looking at him, she agreed with the opinion that when a person is silent, he seems completely different. Taking her hand, Vigros wondered what the heroine was thinking about now. At that moment, she remembered the maid's words that there were already rumors about their relationship. Iola wanted to add something else, but when she looked into the Duke's eyes, she blushed, stopping in mid-sentence. At the same time, she felt an emotional explosion inside herself, deciding that she couldn't just communicate with such a beautiful person. After calming down, she also remembered that there had been big changes in the imperial palace, and the hero wondered what was wrong with her family. As it turned out, they planned to use the laws of the empire, because the more laws, the stronger you are. However, knowing that she was the crown prince's fiancé, Vigros understood that the family would not let the girl go so easily. Hearing these words, Iola suddenly had an epiphany and looked at the cardinal in surprise. Before that, he himself offered her to move in with him, and if these were not empty words, then she herself wanted it. At the same moment, they both laughed, and Vigros decided that he would look forward to it. He was curious to see their faces when he unexpectedly stole that treasure they didn't even know about. Noticing the stupor and incomprehension in Iola's eyes, he clarified that it was about her family. But the heroine knew for sure that they thought of her as garbage, not a treasure. These words caused shock and anger in the hero, who wanted the girl not to even joke like that. Iola remembered how her family had forced her to die alone, although even before that, she felt like she was no longer in this world. Looking at her carefully, Vigros decided to clarify if she really did not like them at all. As it turned out, this was not entirely true because the heroine simply hated them. Furthermore, in a previous life, the crown prince had asked her the same question. Ophid was shocked to learn that Iola was being abused by her family. At that moment, the girl's pride was hurt, and she felt incredibly ashamed. And now, touching the water with her hand, she decided that she would never forgive them. Then the Duke decided to find out maybe he should just kill them? Although the girl was afraid to ask this, she still decided to clarify if he was serious. After receiving confirmation, she could already mentally hear people calling her an immoral villain. However, she did not see the need to kill them, wanting them to suffer for the rest of their lives. Smiling, the heroine felt no pity for them and did not want to give them even one chance to atone for their guilt. After listening to her, the hero was surprised that her whole goal was limited to such a decision. Iola was also interested in hearing Vigros's own opinion on this matter. Taking her hands, the Duke wanted to take the matter more seriously. He decided that nails should be driven into their hearts and trampled on these people so that they would never be able to get up again. The hero was also determined to provide support and hoped that she would agree to it. According to Wigros, these people deserved more punishment, and it was necessary to make them cry with regret. Some moments were a little embarrassing for Iola, but in general she liked this option more. Then the Duke decided to show her family how valuable the heroine was, and that she should not be looked down upon. In addition, he wanted to immediately start rehearsing the curses. Upon hearing this, Iola was confused and stared at Wigros in bewilderment. He wanted to give her a masterclass on how to swear so that it sounds very rude. Shuddering all over, the girl agreed, and the hero was ready to start learning immediately. However, today it was too late and I did not want to end the dates with curses, so it was decided to postpone the lesson. At this time, Ginas was standing in front of the door to his sister's chambers, holding a candle in his hands. Knocking on her door, he was surprised to find that the door was open. As he began to go inside, he thought that it was already too late, and had she never returned? Never finding her, her brother was shocked, not understanding how Iola had the courage to go out so late. Where could she be now, and could it be that the rumors about her left-wing affair turned out to be true? The aristocrats now and then discussed her adventures with another man, condemning the girl. In addition, the entire Ribant family was criticized, and no one understood how she could become a candidate for saints. Ginas was horrified, knowing how angry his parents were, and all because of Iola's antics. Realizing that it was pointless to resist her, the hero suddenly heard a rustle. A small hand grabbed him by the edge of his jacket, and a childish girl's voice called him her brother. Turning around in fright, Ginas decided that he had done nothing wrong. But little Iola continued to hold him by the jacket, begging for help and fearing him. Being in shock, Ginas remembered that it was all only for her. However, the girl did not stop begging him for her salvation, collapsing with tears at her brother's feet. Meanwhile, the heroine decided to find out from Wigros what kind of person His Majesty the Emperor was. As it turned out, the hero was not sure what kind of person he really was. But in appearance, he was cruel, greedy, and prone to intrigue, and also the Emperor went out of his way to achieve what he wanted. From these words, Iola became even more frightened, which made her sigh sadly. But when she heard that the cardinal thought she had nothing to fear, she looked at him at once. As long as he was around, no one would be able to touch her with a finger. The heroine decided to clarify that if his opponent was the Emperor, then is Wigros planning treason? Beaming with joy, the cardinal did not understand what was so surprising about this. He also wanted to know that the girl hesitated to make up her mind because she was afraid of death. She would be lying if she denied it, but there was another reason. Although it was selfish, Iola didn't care who bled to death, as long as it wasn't herself. That's what the heroine thought, given her past life and everything she went through. But now, there were people dear to her next to her, and the girl did not want them to suffer. Therefore, she decided to protect them all, no matter what, including Wigros. Judging by the ending of the novel, the Duke wants endless affection for Akanda. But he dies an unfortunate death, as a dark villain, and in the end, the book has a bad ending. Now the girl understood that she was not the only one who influenced the course of history. The life of Iola and the life of Wigros were essentially the same. Therefore, she decided that in this life, the hero would not be the cardinal who was crazy about Lady Ernest. The heroine wanted to help Wigros achieve the desired ending, no matter what. And she didn't want him to lose or for anyone to take advantage of him. Her only wish for the hero was that he met the end not with pain, sadness, and loneliness, but with a smile. Suddenly there was a proposal from Wigros to change his place, which puzzled Iola. The heroine wondered where he was going at such a late hour, but the cardinal simply did not want to part like this. Stretching out his hand, he decided to show the girl his secret hideout. Not understanding anything, she trusted and gave her hand, after which the cardinal pulled it sharply. In a second, they were both standing on their feet, right in the boat, which began to sway violently from such sudden movements. Looking at the hero in bewilderment, Iola thought that there was no need to frighten him so much. Besides, a shelter is good, but wasn't it dangerous to stand in a boat like this, and so close to each other? However, there was no way that Wigros wanted to put his precious saint in danger. Therefore, he calmly created a portal right in the boat, which further discouraged the girl. She wondered where exactly his secret hideout was. As it turned out, it was a place where rich people gathered, with high ranks and a lot of free time. In addition, according to Wigros, now was the time to start spreading rumors again. The date in the city center was fun, of course, but now it was necessary to give everyone a clearer understanding. Greatly alerted by these words, Iola decided to clarify what exactly he meant. Covering her mouth with his finger, he decided that soon she would see and understand everything herself. After all, today was their secret meeting, and on this note, the heroes dissolved in the portal, which disappeared after them. At the same time, another portal appeared next to a majestic building standing far from the city. Jumping out of it, Wigros landed carefully on the ground, holding Iola in his arms. The heroine did not understand how Duke Illa, known for his cruelty, could be so gentle. The cardinal was surprised, thinking that she did not perceive tenderness. However, the girl was also wondering if he would be proud if she called him a villain. Putting a mask on her face, the hero decided that there would be nothing wrong with it. He was used to the fact that everyone was afraid of him and cursed behind his back, so he didn't care about it. It also meant that Vigros was strong enough to withstand any attack. At the same moment, a luxurious white dress suddenly appeared on Iola, which confused her. They came here to start spreading rumors, but the hero didn't want to reveal everything at once, although he also understood that it was impossible not to recognize those beautiful silvery locks. After that, they went to the entrance to the building, near which a masked guard was standing. Without saying anything, the servant obediently opened the door for them, respectfully bowing to the masters. As she walked through the corridors, Iola saw various paintings and statues, and at some point, she began to guess where they were. Her guesses turned out to be correct, and this place turned out to be nothing more than a black market. True, the heroine expected that it would be more gloomy and dangerous here. Besides, is it possible to bring a precious saint to such a place? As it turned out, coming here to spread rumors was one of the main goals, but not the only one. For a long time, Vigros wanted to show her something, and after these words, they went behind the veil, finding themselves next to the stage. On the other hand, the rich were sitting, and in the middle of the stage there was a vendor demonstrating various lots. Iola was very surprised by the incredible number of people who were here. According to the hero, things that were difficult or impossible to find appeared for sale here. However, he brought the heroine here for the last lot, which was the highlight of the program. While one worker solemnly carried him to the stage, another warmly introduced the main event of the day to the guests. Iola was shocked to see that it turned out to be her precious flower, created from crystals. Bets started immediately at 500,000 and instantly soared to several million. The heroine was amazed at how ardently these people wanted to buy her flower. Frozen in shock, Iola was now convinced that Rake's words were true. After the preparations for the auction were completed, he met with her and the gentleman at the Ill Mansion. Rake decided that when there were too many things and they were not of much value, then he would put her lot up for auction. Twisting the flower in her hand, the heroine was worried that no one would like it, and then no one would buy it. However, Vigros's subordinate was willing to swear with his life that this would not happen. After all, the flower was made of precious stones, while it had a delicate aroma and also, it will bloom forever. The cardinal was calm, because Rake would never set his eyes on something that did not bring money, so he could be trusted. In addition, as the owner of the black market, he could personally assure that this flower would become the new symbol of the empire. Meanwhile, guest number 28 won the auction and became the proud owner of a precious flower. In fact, Vigros wanted to buy everything here so that no one would get anything. But then his beloved saint would have problems, so he didn't do it. In blissful ecstasy, Iola also felt a strange sensation inside. The girl always heard that a loser like her could not do anything, and no one ever really wanted her. Everyone only insulted the heroine and rejected her, and this was her everyday life. But now, she felt as if she was receiving recognition from all these people. Looking at her carefully, Wigros was sorry that Iola was happy about such a trifle. Taken aback by such words, the heroine stared at him in bewilderment, her eyes rounded. Smiling back, the hero decided that they still had a lot to show. Grinning, the girl was in full agreement and taking the cardinal by the arm, confidently looked at the stage. Meanwhile, a white carriage suddenly drove up to the entrance to the black market building. Seeing the crown prince coming out of it, the guard was shocked and trembled. Handing him the document, Ophid came here with an inspection, by order of His Imperial Majesty. Looking menacingly at the guard, he wanted to be immediately escorted to the black market. After a while, the prince walked along the corridors of the house, accompanied by his knights. Even knowing the depravity of this rotten society, he still had to ignore it. However, Ophid knew that the guests of the black market had silently identified its owner, who turned out to be Duke Illa. Thus, such a place was not only the secret place of Wigros, but also the power of those who used it. Most of the guests here were high-ranking aristocrats, and even the emperor had a hard time controlling this place. In order to maintain power, the imperial family turns a blind eye to the existence of this place and only patrols. Looking at the guests from the balcony, the prince was just making his rounds, but when he ascended the throne, the first thing he wanted to do was destroy this place. Suddenly, his eyes fell on the couple who were standing in the distance, and to his horror, he recognized Yahello von Ribant. Even the mask could not hide her silver hair, by which you could immediately recognize the heroine. Confused, the crown prince didn't understand why his fiancée was here. Besides, it was safe to say that she was standing next to Vigros. This was evidenced by his black cat mask, which was the symbol of the owner of the black market. But why are they together, and why is she smiling as if she is happy to be around him? Realizing that she had never smiled so much next to him, Ophid gritted his teeth with jealousy. The only thing Yahello did in the presence of His Highness was to demand that the engagement with him be broken. In addition, the mask will not save, and other people have already begun to recognize the heroes. And if the truth is revealed that the bride betrayed the crown prince by dating another, much more criticism will fall on her. Ophid imagined with horror the angry face of the Marquis of Ribant and what he might do to his daughter when he found out about it. However, what was the reason that Lady Ribant was with this bastard now? Thinking that perhaps the reason for the break in the engagement was the Duke, Ophid was dismayed. Looking at His Highness, the accompanying knights hoped that he was all right. But suddenly the heir gave them the order to leave immediately, leaving him alone. Looking menacingly at the stage, Ophid decided that he needed to meet someone today. After the auction was over, the cardinal said goodbye to Yahello, after which he went for an evening walk. On the way, he admired how amazing their date had been. If he had known in advance that the heroine would be so happy, he would have brought her here much earlier. But suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by someone who jumped around the corner to meet the Duke. Grabbing his collar, Ophid pinned Vigros against the wall of the building, and the hero only smiled back. He was surprised that a noble crown prince of the empire ran to visit him. Looking menacingly at Duke Il, Ophid wanted to know what he was up to. Why was he with Yahello, and did the hero bring her here just to show off? Or perhaps Vigros also threatened her, which finally puzzled the cardinal. Calmly grasping the prince's hand holding him, the hero could hardly restrain himself. He did not understand what kind of nonsense it was, and would the heroine fall for such tricks as threats? Although Vigros understood that the prince was not so close to the bride to know such a thing. Ophid was furious, not understanding how this man dared to be bold with him. Calmly brushing off his hand, the hero decided that the prince was not in a position to talk to him like that now. In addition, Ophid himself abandoned his bride and pretended that nothing had happened. At the same time, he began dating another girl, and now he decided to blame the Duke. The prince wanted to object, but could not find the words, for Vigros was right. Besides that, everyone already knew about it, and did His Highness really think that he could do it? But Yahello couldn't? It was time to stop making excuses and finally admit that no one had ever given him the right to do this to a girl. Ophid froze in helplessness to answer this, and the hero meanwhile began to leave. This was Duke Il's final warning, and the prince was no longer to be interested in Yahello's life and affairs. Instead, he must be ready, because even if Vigros falls under the curse or his heart explodes, he will not leave him alone. The hero continued his further path in reflection on what had happened. He was indignant at Ophid, because of whose appearance all the good mood was brushed away. But the surprises did not end there, and a girl in a raincoat suddenly appeared around the corner, bumping into him. Looking at her in surprise, Vigros hoped that the lady was all right. Meanwhile, Akanda was thrilled to finally meet him. After all, this was her second main character, a man who was necessary for Lady Irna's. There were rumors among the people that even fairies were sold on the black market. Akanda, who grew up with righteous beliefs, could not come to terms with the trade in living beings. Therefore, she often hid and helped the fairies escape without being noticed. One day, when she was once again hiding from the guards, a gentleman quietly approached her. With his hand over her mouth, Vigros hoped that Lady Irnis would be as quiet as possible. Akanda had memorized this scene, so now she could easily find this place. And now, having finally met the cardinal, the girl did not intend to let him go. The hero himself was shocked that these two decided to come to him together. Lady Irnis's words took her by surprise, leaving her deeply confused. First of all, the Duke wanted to find out what she was doing, which made Akanda even more taken aback. She did not understand what was going on, because Vigros could not tell her such a thing. But realizing that she had just called him by his name, the girl sped herself up, because this was their first meeting. Looking contemptuously at Lady Ernest, the hero realized that now a true fake appeared before him. Hearing this word addressed to him for the first time, Akanda's mind was clouded with shock. She could not understand what he was talking about at all, and decided that there had been some kind of misunderstanding, after which she held out her hand to Vigros. She confidently considered herself the main character of this work, but suddenly the cardinal disgustedly threw her hand back. Looking menacingly at Lady Ernest, he didn't understand how she dared to touch him at all. As he left, he also thought that he had never allowed her to say his name with her mouth, so he wanted her to stop doing it. In a past life, Akanda was the best actress named Kwak Suhi, who won the award for Best Actress. At that time, her heartbreaking acting in the cinema touched every viewer to the core. She made her film debut as a child, with outstanding emotionality and acting skills. While receiving the award, she sincerely thanked her fans for their support, considering it a great honor for herself. However, she had to live the way other people wanted, and detractors with criticism appeared on the internet every now and then. And although the girl was bursting with anger, she tried to restrain herself and smile, because people wanted to see Kwak Suhi on the screen. But a real girl, she constantly listened to the fact that now there are many new and good actresses in the world. Because of the frantic desire to be the one and only, the heroine began to drink and lead a promiscuous lifestyle. She destroyed everything that got on her nerves, not noticing how it was ruining herself. As a result, she even began to pursue other actresses, which finally the producer and he decided that it was time for her to leave. It was about an article about a girl bullying another actress, but Kwak Suhi herself believed that she was just giving advice. She was calm, as her star reputation would not be shaken by such nonsense. After all, she had a huge number of films, 20 years of experience, and the devotion of millions of fans. But one day, everything changed when one of the actresses committed suicide, leaving a suicide note with the girl's name. In it, the actress revealed the bullying of Kwak Suhi, which caused her death, which very soon became the talk of all the news. After that, the police began an investigation, and the girl was forced to hide from everyone. All the fans turned away from her, and many people began to condemn the agencies that covered up for the one who drove under the influence. As a result, her whole life turned upside down because of that note, and the girl died all alone, in a shabby room where she was hiding. That's exactly how it seemed, but suddenly, she heard a voice that wondered if she wanted to go into the world where she would be the main character. Thinking that she had already died, Kwak Suhi did not understand who was talking to her now. Sitting down on her knees, she saw a black rectangle in front of her, floating in the air and wanting to lead her somewhere. Realizing that it was a book, the girl decided that she had completely lost her mind. However, if she wanted, the book was ready to take her to the world of happiness, where the girl would be the only and beloved main character. Having comprehended these words, she wished with all her heart to get into a world where everyone would love her, no matter what she did. Rejoicing at this, the book began to transform, replacing the black cover with the symbol of the novel. Now she was the only protagonist of this world and could own anything. After reading the novel again in her bed, after meeting Vigros, Akanda decided that she was the most important person here, and she could not allow anyone to take away this world that belonged to her. The next day, an extremely unexpected visitor arrived in the Duchy of Illa. Rake personally escorted and introduced him to the gentleman who was in his office. It turned out to be a priest from the temple, the right hand of the high priest Edis. Vigros was grateful to the guest for the journey he had traveled and invited him to sit down on the sofa. Placing a hand on his shoulder, the Duke decided that there was something to be checked before he could get down to business. To begin with, he wanted to clarify that perhaps a church servant had come here to respond to his proposal. Hearing this, Edis drooped, his eyes downcast, as if afraid to say what he wanted. The Duke knew that the temple was still a closed and conservative place where, in collusion with the Emperor, they received prophecies about the saints. Therefore, even after sending a letter there, Vigros did not have great expectations to receive a response, and he certainly did not think that they would send a high-ranking priest here, but apparently the temple began to show a more tolerant attitude. Edis knew perfectly well that the Duke did not have any positive feelings for them. But he was here to face the truth, and there was no need for him to come here with other thoughts. Therefore, the priest wanted to know what they had been diligently turning a blind eye to, namely the truth related to the oracles, which confused Vigros. During the last conversation with the high priest, Edis decided that it was time for them to redeem themselves. At that moment, His Holiness handed over to his assistant a letter he had sent from Duke Il. The high priest also decided that Addis needed to contact him urgently and continue to work hand in hand. They only wanted to know what was the truth that was to be encountered and what kind of faith was to be observed. Edis was surprised that Vigros had personally sent this letter, but the Duke himself confirmed it. This turned out to be very unexpected for the temple, which greatly amused the hero. The priest himself would never have thought that the ill family would make them such an offer. However, he did not come here to atone for his guilt, but to face the truth. Then, instead of explaining, Vigros decided that it would be better to show him. After the Duke put his hand on his face, Edis suddenly found himself in a strange, dark place. Not understanding anything, the priest began to look around in confusion, being shocked by the strange strength of the hero. Suddenly he heard a furious scream from a man and saw someone hit a girl sitting on the floor. To his horror, Edis recognized the Marquise of Ribant, who was beating Yahello, considering her a disgrace to his family. At this moment, he also began to hear the voices of other people who openly poured foul language on her. Being in shock, he found the body of the heroine in front of him, lying in a pool of his own blood. Gasping for breath with terror, the priest returned unexpectedly to the Duke's study. He immediately began to cough loudly, trying to catch his breath and recover from what he saw. Looking at him seriously, Vigros hoped that now he finally understood. After all, it was the pain that Yahello endured because of the false oracles of the temple. However, Edis couldn't understand how a hero could have such incredible strength. But in the temple, they simply did not know that among the garbage, sometimes there are people who have something like this. At these words, the priest was covered with goosebumps, looking at the cardinal with fear. Vigros understood his surprise, for it was a unique power. In addition, it was like a miracle used by the saints. Taken aback by this, Edis had also heard about Yahello's relationship with Vigros, and to some extent understood his behavior. However, due to excessive anxiety, the priest wanted to know that the hero was also doing this in order to use his power. By the word too, he meant the emperor, which the Duke immediately guessed. But wasn't the church still selling the place to the Holy Imperial family, which was complete shamelessness? And since they were talking about it, Vigros wanted to check the latter. He wanted to know if Edis was ready to do anything for the saint. Gathering his thoughts, the priest decided that he was ready to sacrifice his life for her. The hero hoped that he was confident in his words, because then the emperor could become an enemy to him and the entire temple. But Edis's decision was final, and he didn't even care about the correctness of this path. Rejoicing at this and shaking hands with him, Vigros intended to believe in the priest's convictions. After the conversation, Rake watched Edis leave through the window for a while, wondering if it was all right. Vigros, at this moment, calmly enjoyed the scent of the flowers he wanted to give Yahello, and did not understand the employees' fears. Rake was worried about their sudden cooperation with the temple because it was not part of their plans. Adjusting the antique on the flowers, the Duke decided that there was nothing to worry about because he had thought everything over carefully. Then the servant wanted to know the reason for such a decision because neither the temple nor the saint was included in the plans. Did he refuse to bear such a burden of responsibility without even understanding what was happening? Smiling, the cardinal thought that the reason for everything was incredibly simple. He wanted to show the heroine how beautiful she is and that she is worthy of love. Moreover, the hero hoped that Yahello, as a saint, would become the nation's favorite of the empire. The rumors spreading about her throughout the empire had no end in sight. Gossip was very different, and someone even believed that she received the title of false saint thanks to her wealth. And Vigros wondered if Rake realized how baseless these rumors were. It was funny that the good rumors that they were trying to promote in order to drown out the bad ones disappeared very quickly. It seemed incredibly strange, and now the employee understood it too. It seemed that no one was interested in the innocence of Yahello von Ribant. Rake came to the conclusion that someone was intentionally interfering with them, and the Duke thought it was a very good idea. But this man must have enough power to do so. Besides, he will probably lose the most if the heroine becomes a saint. Realizing that it was directly about the emperor, the worker was horrified. However, Vigros personally knew no one who could be capable of such an act, except for this old man. Probably he watched both girls and made a balanced decision. Namely, the monarch decided which of them would be most useful to him. While one side is shining to create a perfect future, the other has decided to trample it completely. Yahello was completely innocent of the unfounded rumors and criticism against her. It's just that the emperor used her, making the heroine a scapegoat. Therefore, Vigros intended to make Yahello a saint and make everyone know her real one. If this happens, no one will dare to criticize the girl anymore, and she will become the beloved saint of the entire empire. Meanwhile, Ophid arrived at the saint's mansion for a scheduled meeting with Akanda. But when he learned that she was gone, the prince was very surprised and decided to ask the servants where she could go. As it turned out, it was unknown, but Lady Ernest wanted to tell His Highness that the matter was urgent. The servant decided to find her, but the prince forbade her, deciding that he would come next time. After that, he went out onto the veranda and slowly walked straight, chasing different thoughts in his head. It was all very strange, because Akanda had never cancelled a meeting with him. Moreover, even her personal servant Jane unexpectedly disappeared somewhere. Besides, he could not forget the night when he returned in the carriage, after meeting the Duke of Illa. Looking out the window, he looked at the night landscapes of the city and reflected on the latest events. But suddenly, his gaze fell on the cloaked girl, whose face he recognized as Akanda. Confused, he didn't understand what she was doing here at such a late hour. After all, if you think objectively, there was nothing but a black market in this alley. Dismissing the thought that she had also seen Vigros, the prince decided that he must have just imagined and identified himself. At that moment, Ophid heard a familiar laugh and a voice coming from the street. Iola walked along the path in the company of Tiana and Kiran, talking merrily with them. The prince wondered why she was so joyful. And since when did she begin to smile so sincerely? Because she had always been cold and indifferent. But suddenly he felt a lump in his throat, and his heart sank to his heels. Ophid remembered that her smile was not at all uncommon, but rather an ordinary expression on her face. It's just that the prince didn't know it, since she had always been cold to him. And really, if you think about it, he was the only person she didn't smile at. Ophid did not understand whether he, the crown prince of an entire empire, could suffer from something like this. At this moment, the prince finally realized how pathetic he was, even in his own eyes. Meanwhile, Akanda and Jane went straight to the imperial palace for an audience with His Majesty. While Lady Ernest was crying to the emperor, the maid stood outside the door and listened attentively. The old man wanted to know who had so upset the poor girl, who was shedding bitter tears. The emperor thought she had been offended by the crown prince, but Akanda immediately denied it. However, Ophid already has a fiancé, and that if he falls in love with Lady Ribant, Lady Ernest will be a hindrance. The girl was afraid that if she did not become a saint, she would probably have to leave the prince. Furiously slamming his fist on the armrest, the old man thought it was nonsense and decided that Akanda had nothing to worry about. In the emperor's opinion, she should have realized long ago that no one else would become a saint except her. But Lady Ernest was worried that she, being not a bride, had her eye on His Highness, who had seen Iola so often lately. Listening to all this, Jane sincerely sympathized with her mistress, shocked that this cocky fake was to blame for everything. Unable to bear it, the maid decided to help her mistress in some way. The emperor, meanwhile, was convinced that Lady Ernest's fears were unnecessary. He believed that that stupid girl could never become a saint. In addition, the old man had heard rumors that Lady Ribant, being the crown prince's fiancé, was dating another man. This showed the arrogance and recklessness of the heroine, and only Akanda was worthy of becoming a saint in this empire. Looking carefully at the monarch, Lady Ernest decided to ask if he was ready to take her side. However, in the opinion of the emperor, this was too obvious, and he wanted to prove his words with deeds. Namely, he decided to postpone the date of the girl's debut to an earlier date, which shocked her. A big reception is just about to take place, and when she arrives there as Ophid's companion, everyone will officially acknowledge the connection between them. Looking intently at Akanda, the monarch decided to clarify whether he had chosen her. It was urgent to make sure that everyone knew who would occupy this magnificent place and be next to Ophid. At that moment, Lady Ernest, unable to contain her delight, rushed at His Majesty with an embrace. Looking at her sympathetically, the monarch thought bitterly of how much suffering this gentle girl had endured. He was also very happy and hoped that the girl would not worry anymore. Holding back her laughter, Akanda fully agrees with the emperor, anticipating future events. She was sincerely grateful to this monarch, who so carefully took her side. After a while, Iola was peacefully sitting in her room and reading a book, and a cup of tea was standing next to her. Reading the page with interest, she reached for the mug without looking, wanting to take a sip. Bringing the cup to her mouth and feeling that it was very hot, the heroine began to slowly blow on the tea inside it. At the same moment, Vigros appeared out of thin air, snatching the cup from her hands and not wanting Iola to drink it. Looking at him dumbfounded, the heroine was shocked by such an abrupt appearance that frightened her. She became interested in when the hero came here and, as it turned out, quite recently. Looking disgustingly at the tea, the cardinal did not understand why he should drink this filth, which also contained poison. But Vigros was even more confused when he heard that Iola knew this very well. A few days ago, the heroine saw someone shamanizing over her tea. She decided not to catch Jane red-handed and watch for a while to see if she would succeed. After all, the poison was powerless against the saint, but the Duke did not like it anyway. Suddenly, the smell of something sweet gently touched Iola's nose, causing her to break into a smile. She realized that Vigros had brought her a treat, but the hero wanted her to guess what it was, which made her taken aback. However, gently touching her face with his palm, the hero decided that it would be too boring to just give it away. Therefore, she only had to guess, and then she would receive her reward. Vigros approached as if he was going to kiss Iola, which made her very embarrassed. But suddenly the cardinal abruptly moved away, leaving a large basket of sweets and flowers in the heroine's hands. Looking at the gift, the girl was sincerely surprised and found it very cute. Then the hero wondered if she really expected something different from him. She realized that he was just making fun of her, but in Vigros's opinion, it couldn't be otherwise because she was so pretty. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and the heroine invited the guest to enter. It turned out to be Siana, who wanted to distract her from the book for a while. Iola received a letter from the Imperial Palace, which surprised her very much. In the original history, there was never such a letter, and even with the Imperial seal, which meant that it was written by the monarch. Siana, in turn, was extremely happy to finally see the young man of the mistress in person. The heroine decided that perhaps Ophid had finally agreed to break off the engagement. Otherwise, why would the emperor himself write to her personally? From the letter, it became known that in order to improve relations between the two candidates for saints, Iola was asked to attend a banquet with her partner. Realizing that they planned to postpone the debut date, the Duke and the heroine were stunned. This banquet was the most colorful of all that was described in the novel. Both candidates made their debut in society after this event, and then they began full-fledged secular activities. But why then was the debut postponed directly to the time of the banquet itself? The reason why the banquet was held in the second part of the novel was because of the saint's ceremony. In any case, Iola was glad that things would develop faster than she and Vigros had anticipated. The next morning, the crown prince slept peacefully in his bed, illuminated by the rays of the sun. The atmosphere of complete serenity was disturbed by a nightmare that he was dreaming at that moment. Ophid did not understand, since when he began to unconditionally believe in the sanctity of Akanda and why he decided that she was his fate. Why does Lady Ernest appear when you least expect her? And why did she end up near the black market that day, secretly coming there? Suddenly, he could see the silhouette of Akanda through the thick darkness of hopelessness that enveloped him. Running after her, the prince wanted her to stop for at least a minute. Finally, through the darkness, his hand found the shoulder of Lady Ernest, who stood with her back to him. When she turned sharply to him and smiled, Ophid saw a black mass with narrow yellowish eyes instead of a face. At the same moment, he woke up screaming in a cold sweat, numb with terror. Trying to catch his breath, the prince did not immediately realize that it was just a dream. A knight immediately ran to him, hoping that everything was all right with his highness. Hearing that this was so, the warrior also wanted to notify the prince of the arrival of a guest to him. The lady was waiting for him outside, and Ophid wondered who exactly had come to see him. The knight proudly announced the arrival of the Lady of Akanda, which horrified the prince. It was surprising that he had only dreamed of her and was already there, wanting to meet. The knight was surprised by the reaction of his highness, who usually rejoiced at the arrival of Lady Ernest. Suddenly, Akanda unceremoniously entered the heir's chambers, glad that she had not woken him up. Wishing him good morning, the girl hoped that his highness had slept well. Ophid wanted to know why she had come to him. Akanda knew that perhaps the prince had already heard from the emperor that her debut had been postponed to the upcoming banquet. However, there was one nuance because you had to come there with your partner. In other words, Lady Ernest wanted to know if Ophid would be able to accompany her on her debut. At that moment, the prince remembered that terrible appearance of Akanda with blackness instead of a face, which horrified him. Pulling himself together, he agreed to attend the banquet as her partner. Pretending that this was a surprise to her, Lady Ernest was completely delighted. Taking Ophid in her arms made her truly happy. However, just in case, Akanda made him promise that he would not deceive her. Now, it was time for her to urgently go in search of a suitable outfit and start preparing for the banquet. For now, Lady Ernest wanted His Highness to get a good rest, and later she would show him her dress. When she left the room, the prince suddenly had a request for the night. Hearing that he should start spying on Akanda starting today, the warrior was shocked. Ophid wanted him to find out everything, including where she went and who she was dating. The knight was sure that it was Lady Irnis who would become a saint, and did not understand how it was possible to follow her. However, the prince decided that he should be more careful with his words, which is why the warrior was completely lost. The saint's ceremony had not yet taken place, so Akanda was just a candidate now. And besides, Ophid was furious that his own knight would dare to question his orders. Hearing these words and seeing the prince's angry look, the warrior was petrified with fear. Wasting no time, he immediately fell to his knees and began to beg for forgiveness, promising to immediately begin to carry out the order. The warrior decided to keep a close eye on Lady Akanda and report to His Highness on her every move. In addition to all this, Ophid hoped that he would try to make sure that no one except the two of them found out about it. Especially that information should never reach the ears of Lady Irnis herself. Later, while in his mansion, Wigros wondered how Iola's preparations for the banquet were going. In general, everything was fine, but the heroine could not choose the right outfit for the occasion. She wouldn't bother if it wasn't for their debut. However, the Duke could not allow her to dress haphazardly and wanted to find out her preferences. Iola could only name what she definitely did not want to wear, based on her past life. Back then, she had a lot of trouble because she wore the same dress as Akanda, although Iola later learned the truth that it was just a trap. Lady Ernest deliberately praised the heroine's dress on the eve of the release, inciting the girl to wear it, and she herself promised to come in another. Suddenly, Rake had the superb idea that a dress that deserved everyone's attention should be extremely rare. And just now, everyone was wondering what kind of dress Lady Ribant would wear, which they had to take advantage of. Vigros was surprised to learn of the worker's deep knowledge of women's dresses. He also wanted to know what kind of outfit he was talking about, and Rake hoped that the Duke was willing to spend his money. A little later, when Akanda learned from Jane that Iola would wear Iris's dress to the banquet, she was horrified. However, the maid heard this personally, from the owner of the jewelry store. Someone from the Ribant family came to see if he had any jewelry to match Iris's dress. Jane was sure that Lady Ribant was not capable of getting her hands on such a legendary dress, so she must be bluffing. According to rumors, Iris' dress was created by mistake by wizards and had a unique fabric that was smooth and shiny like metal. In addition, the dress has an incredible feature of adjusting to the figure of the woman wearing it, creating a charming silhouette. However, there was a reason why this outfit was considered unaffordable, namely its price. Even high-ranking aristocrats were unable to purchase this legendary dress, which was kept in perfect condition. It was demonstrated only on special occasions, under the constant patronage of the imperial family. Blue with envy, Akanda simply couldn't let Iola wear something like that. She also hoped that her maid was still bothering Lady Ribant. As it turned out, Jane had added something to her tea, and Iola must have drunk it without the slightest suspicion, since she didn't know anything. Therefore now the condition of her skin and health has become a banal matter of time. Clarifying that this did not threaten the heroine's life in any way, Lady Ernest was sincerely grateful to her maid for her excellent work. In addition, thanks to Jane, she finally decided what kind of dress she would wear to the banquet. Meanwhile, Iola arrived at the imperial palace to meet with the prince. The heroine admired how magnificent and majestic this place was, and although she herself sent a letter to Ophidu asking for a meeting, Iola did not think that he would respond so quickly. In any case, it was even better, because there was nowhere to drag it out anymore. Going to the reception room to the table and putting the document on it, she suddenly heard a noise from the outside. The prince flew to her, fluttering with joy and gently pronouncing the heroine's name. Surprised by his excessive emotionality, Iola greeted His Highness respectfully. She was also surprised that he had fled, but Ophid did not want to keep the heroine waiting. It was the first time she had expressed a desire to come to him, and the prince was so happy that he tossed and turned in bed all night. Being perplexed by his strange behavior, the heroine wanted to finally sit down and talk to him. Suddenly, Ophidu felt a little sad at this treatment, which surprised her even more. He believed that since they had known each other for a long time, it was possible to communicate less formally. Iola did not understand why he was suddenly upset. After all, she always addressed him like this. In addition, the atmosphere as a whole was somehow unusual, and the heroine decided that she just chose the wrong day. Usually Ophid was much colder and more cunning, so it was strange that he behaved so gently and softly. Sighing, the heroine did not understand how she could address him without formalities. Hearing his words that she could try to start from this moment, Iola was completely taken aback. In addition, instead of asking permission to come, the heroine could now come at any time and without warning. Also, from that moment on, she could safely call him simply by his first name. The heroine was completely confused, not understanding why he gave her the same rights as a conde. Laughing, she thought that she and His Highness had a misunderstanding. When Iola handed him the divorce paper, she had not come here to make friends with him. The girl's only desire was to get a signature from him on the official termination of the engagement. Judging by Ophid's face, he did not even imagine such an outcome of events. Previously, he had never taken the heroine's words seriously, even when she demanded a break in the engagement. But today, Iola decided that she would not back down from her decision in any case. The status of the Crown Prince's fiancé was an excellent excuse for all the interventions from the imperial palace. Therefore, before the debut, it was necessary to end any relationship with Ophid once and for all. However, instead of the expected reaction, the heir simply silently examined the document, which puzzled the heroine a little. She didn't know if he was trying to turn it into a joke again, or if he wanted to fight because he didn't want to break off the engagement. But suddenly the prince wondered, after all, Iola really wanted a breakup? Not understanding what was happening to him, the heroine agreed with his words. Ophid smiled and decided to clarify that if they broke off the engagement, would she be happy? As it turned out, for Iola, breaking off the engagement was the only way to become happy. Surely His Highness, like many others, believed that the most important thing for her was to become a saint. The heroine studied for this, competed with others, and constantly faced criticism and insults. For herself, this period of life was filled only with suffering and pain. And to be honest, Iola has never felt truly happy. Therefore, she no longer wanted to be someone's bride or live just to become a saint. But the heroine was determined to start living only for herself. At that moment, based on her reasoning about his own future, Ophid realized that there was no place for him there. He thought bitterly that Vigros was right and had no right to be jealous of Iola, and he didn't deserve her smile. In some case, he humbly gave his consent and decided to break off the engagement if the heroine wanted it. Iola was discouraged that the prince had agreed to this so easily. However, Ophid simply could not give up what could make the heroine happy. Of course, there might be an uproar if the emperor found out about it, but the prince intended to change his father's mind. In addition, he had a condition on which he gave his consent. Sincerely hoping that everything would be within reason, Iola decided to find out what condition she was talking about. As it turned out, the prince wanted to spend time with the heroine at least once every few days. Shocked by such an ultimatum, Iola did not understand what he meant, but Ophid just wanted to see her as a friend for only a few hours a day. He hoped that, at least in this way, the heroine would allow him to be next to her. Iola did not understand at all why His Highness was suddenly offering her such a thing. However, if he wants to be just friends, then that's okay, so she agreed. Now, they will sometimes see each other not as a couple, but as ordinary friends. This is quite acceptable, given that Ophid does not annul the breakup of the engagement. After shaking hands with her, the prince thanked the girl and asked for forgiveness for everything that had happened in the past.